Good evening, and welcome to the August 7th Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. And we would like to start by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, please, if you would all stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Mr. Dale, if you would take the roll, please.
Yes. Kathy Postlethwaite.
Present.
Josh Fedor.
Present.
Jocelyn Hinshaw.
Present.
Steve Mundy.
Present.
Jim Hurst is
Not present.
online.
I don't know, is he? He's not going to
Won't
be
be here
online.
today?
No.
Okay. Absent. So we have a quorum before.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dale. The next item is the approval of the minutes from our July 3rd meeting. Are there any questions or corrections about the minutes? Hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the minutes as written?
Move that the minutes of the July 3rd, 2024 meeting be accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, the first issue on our docket for this evening is a continuance, and that is docket number 2024-33-DSV. That's RFPDI LLC. And they have asked for a continuance. Mr. Smith, do you have anything to, any comment?
No, I'm sure their attorney will probably elaborate, but the petitioner is out of town. The only issue that we ran into was our rules and procedure. I believe it says you have to notify in a timely manner, and that's 7 days prior. We did this yesterday afternoon, so it technically doesn't automatically get a continuance. So you, as a board, need to vote to approve the continuance. And then you also need to determine if you want to require them to redo their public noticing. If y'all are okay with the noticing they've already done, then there's no need to redo it. Y'all just need to make that determination.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Is the attorney here representing? Thank you. If you would go to the podium and give us your name and address, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Joe Calderon, 11 South Meridian, Indianapolis. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. We represent RFPDI LLC, which is affiliated with the Graham Ray Hall Performance Racing Project. We are requesting a continuance. This is our first request. We received staff's report late last week, and in sharing it with our client, they were scheduled to be out of town, and it's important to have a client representative. More importantly, at least one of the signs that we filed a variance for is getting reworked. So what we hope to use this time for is to collaborate a little bit more with your staff just to address concerns they raised in their report. So we were here a couple of months ago on a different variance. There's no remonstrance that I'm aware of on this case. There wasn't on the past one either. So hopefully continuance to September 4th would be appropriate in the board's eyes as well. We don't think there will be any need for notice because anything that we do will be lesser than what we asked for in our original variance petition. But of course, that's the board's discretion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Calderon. Are there any questions for either the staff or for Mr. Calderon from the board members?
From staff standpoint, do you see any need for additional notice if this is approved?
No, I wouldn't require it if it was my choice. I wouldn't do it.
Okay. Is there a motion to continue?
I move that docket 2024-33-DSV be continued to the September 4th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hinshaw. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Continued to September. The next item on the agenda is docket number 2024-30-UV, Christian Badger. And this is a use variance petition, and it has been withdrawn, or they're asking to have it withdrawn. Mr. Smith, do you have any?
No, this has resolved itself. Long story short, they removed the kitchen stove from the second dwelling unit, and by the definition, removing the stove makes it an accessory building, not a second dwelling unit. So you don't need a use variance for two primaries on one lot anymore.
Okay,
So,
good. And because this was not heard as a petition, it does not violate our rules to
Yeah.
simply vote to withdraw the petition.
yes, ma'am.
Do we have a motion to withdraw the petition?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Henshaw. Any further discussion? All in favor for this motion to withdraw this petition signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That petition has been withdrawn. The next item is docket number 2024-11-DSV, that's Charles Ney, and this also is a petition, the petitioner is asking to have the petition withdrawn. And in this particular case, this was a petition that was heard at our June meeting and was continued at that time, and now we must, if we are going to vote to withdraw this petition, we have to suspend our rules in order to do that. So we have to begin by a motion to suspend rules.
I move to suspend the rules for this motion, for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The rules are suspended. And now the motion to withdraw petition number 2024-11-DSV. Is there a motion to withdraw the petition?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Henshaw. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Good. Motion is or the petition is withdrawn. Thank you. All right, on to continued business. The first item in continued business is docket number 2024-19-DSV, Harris FLP. Is petitioner here? Good. Mr. Smith, any staff report?
As you mentioned, this is a continuance from the July BZA meeting. To the petitioner's credit, since that time, it originally had, I believe, 4 original requests. They've worked on their project. It's been reduced down to the 3 that you see on your screen. If I can make it bigger. The first request is to eliminate the foundation plantings requirement. The second is to eliminate the 6-foot parking lot perimeter planting strip. The third is to provide for landscaping in the easement, the Trico easement along the east property line. If you look on your screen, you'll see they have identified, and I'll let Matt speak more to this when he gets up, but they've identified different areas where they've reallocated the landscaping throughout the site. Matt Price also provided quite a bit in depth on the narrative, explaining their reasoning, for example, an expansion of right-of-way, a canopy and outdoor seating, for example, for the foundation plantings. And if y'all have any questions related to that, I'm happy to answer them. However, staff's position has been consistent really throughout all the information that we've received. And we believe the primary problem with this project isn't related to the expansion of right-of-way. It isn't related to the canopy or outdoor seating. We believe the primary issue is the overall square footage of the building. It's the layout and the footprint of the building in relation to the size of the parcel. We believe, simply put, there's too many tenant spaces being provided. In our opinion, reducing the footprint of the building, reduce the number of tenant spaces provided. That will have a cascade effect. That will lead to having fewer parking lot requirements, parking spaces, which will shrink the parking lot. And then it will open up room to allow for the foundation plantings, the 6-foot strip, and would probably, I haven't, you know, I don't want to speak for an engineer or an architect, but it would probably lead to additional area where you could put plantings outside of the easement. So at the heart of the problem, we don't believe it's related to any of the symptoms. We think it's just the footprint and the size of the building that's creating the issue, as opposed to any hardship from the zoning ordinance. Happy to answer any specific questions you have, but that's really staff's point of view. Because of that, we are not supportive of the request.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions for staff on this?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
By shrinking down the size of that building on the lot that's being discussed, you're suggesting that that would eliminate the need for at least 2 or all 3 of the variances that are being requested?
It would, so what it would lead to, if you shrink the size of the building, the formula for parking and the amount, there's a formula, right? Obviously, the number of tenant spaces, the use of those spaces, the square footage, right, goes into that formula for parking. Right now, they're compliant with their parking spaces based off of the building that they are proposing. What we are saying is if you reduce that building, the footprint of the building, you know, I didn't do the math to say how far you had to reduce it, but by reducing the size of the building, the effect of the parking lot would shrink because your square footage, your overall square footage would shrink. That reduction would then lead to the ability to install the 6-foot strip. It would eliminate your need to, instead of, if you look on the screen, you see the pink dots at the bottom in the easement. You see some of the plants to the blue and orange dots there. Those plants and those things have been reallocated to account, and to the petitioner's credit, right? They don't want to eliminate the landscaping. They want to put them other places. If you was able to put that 6-foot planting strip in, you would put the plants in that strip. But the parking lot requires that you don't have that strip. You need that area for parking. Staff believes if you shrink the footprint of the building, which would probably eliminate tenant spaces, that reduction in the building would then cause a reduction in the parking lot and would then open up additional space for foundation plantings, open up additional space for the 6-foot strip. It's kind of a cascading effect, but it all starts with the size of the building. The size of the building means they have to have that size parking lot. And that parking lot then means they do need to eliminate that strip. And because you're eliminating the strip, you have to reallocate the plantings elsewhere, and it kind of just builds on itself. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
I can't tell
have
you
other questions,
specifically
but
how many spaces would be reduced, or how much they need to reduce the building. I didn't do that math, but
that's okay. I have some other questions, but I think they're going to be directed through the petitioner.
okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Smith? Nope. Petitioner, Mr. Price, if you would give your name and address, please, for the record.
Certainly. My name is Matt Price. I'm the attorney for Harris FLP. My office address is at 10 West Market Street, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46204. I also have an office at 91 South Main Street, Zionsville, Indiana, 46077. I proudly represent Harris FLP.
So, Mr. Price,
Yep.
sorry for the interruption. Just so as I know you're aware, we did hear this petition at last month's meeting.
Yep.
So we don't need to go back to 0. We just need to hear a focus on the arguments that
I'm
you've
going to
made.
address point by point the staff report we just heard.
Okay.
I'd like for my presentation to be called up as well. We go to the first slide. We originally proposed 4 variances. One was a relief from buffer yard G, which provides for the buffer on our south side. The other 3 variances relate to the elimination of the parking strip between the parking lot and the buffer area on our west side. The third variance relates to the movement of our foundation plantings to the front of the building. And the fourth one, or the third one that remains, is a novel variance, which is a requirement to seek a variance to plant in an easement. We worked with staff to eliminate the buffer yard G variance request, and we went above and beyond the requirements of the ordinance, both to meet the ordinance requirements by planting 4 additional understory trees, 7 shrubs, and 5 additional evergreens. We also added, in addition to that, 7 shade trees, 14 shrubs, and 4 more evergreens to go over and above the required buffering on the south side. And what we show in green in this slide is the additional plantings that were made since the last time you've reviewed this proposal. And that was in direct response to questions we received from the Board of Zoning Appeals. If you go to the next slide, this relates specifically to the 6-foot planting strip. Since 2020, this entire project has been laid out with the 6-foot planting strip being incorporated into the 30-foot buffer which fronts Michigan Road. The entire development was undertaken with the granting of that variance in March of 2020, including the placement of the roadways that run behind these outlots. This was first granted for the shops, as I said, back in 2020, and has been approved subsequently in 6 separate petitions working your way south from the original shops petition down to where we're located today. In each instance, the Board of Zoning Appeals determined that the petitioner did, in fact, have a hardship. The hardship is not self-created. We're being told through the staff report that if there is any aspect of the need for the variance petition to be filed that could otherwise be avoided by doing something differently, that it's self-created. And I would submit to you that every single variance has an element of self-creation by virtue of the fact that someone's pursuing a project. We could do nothing and we could seek absolutely no variances. This lot is not extraordinarily small and the building is not extraordinarily large, but it is fitting on an outlot that was zoned for this precise purpose as recently as last year. And if we're forced to reduce the size of the building, it will have a cascading effect. There will not be this building or anything like it. And we're going to substitute these retail uses that provide local businesses a place to reside and replace them with something that's more of an in and out, vehicle-driven business, a Rallies, another type of business that doesn't require parking and doesn't require access by pedestrians seeking access through the trail system or otherwise a destination location. We believe that the Board of Zoning Appeals, we can't get into their minds, but I recall the dialogue, some of which we published in our memorandum. We believe that the Board of Zoning Appeals took into account the totality of factors in concluding that the intrinsic characteristics of this property and the surrounding development pattern created the need for this variance and not anything that the petitioner did. This includes a movement to small retail without large parking fields. Originally, this property was zoned with the idea that 125,000 square foot Kroger was going to predominate the parcel, have a large parking field in front of the building, and that parking field would be visible from Michigan Road. There'd also be plenty of room for a parking strip and probably a justification for having a parking strip, additional parking strip buffer. That's been replaced, though, with small-scale retail, small parking fields, and businesses that require people to be able to walk up to the business. We're not seeking to block people from accessing these businesses and storefronts from the perimeter roadways. The overlay in this instance is also an extremely burdensome requirement. This parcel has overall, Appaloosa has 2,200 feet of combined frontage along 421, an amount of area that counts to 13,000 square foot of area that would be devoted to providing additional buffering between the parking lot and Michigan Road. And thirdly, there was an observation that the right-of-way adjoining Michigan Road is extraordinarily wide. The edge of the pavement to the back of curb of the parking lot today is 52 feet. We provide for a 30-foot buffer, or buffer yard, a 20-foot right-of-way within that buffer yard, and a perimeter landscaping area inside that buffer area. I should also add, too, because it's a matter of debate among those of us who practice in the land use area, that the interpretation of this ordinance that it requires an additional 6 feet in addition to the buffer yard, which is 30 feet, you result in a 36-foot buffer area. It's an odd number. Drive up and down 421, pick out a parcel that you think meets the 36-foot buffer area. I've done it. I've measured off various buildings. I don't think a single one has a 36-foot buffer area. Now, some of them may have been built before the overlay, but I think others were not. And I believe that, that this is a novel reading of the ordinance to require an additional 6 feet. I think what the ordinance is really saying is that this green strip should otherwise have a 6-foot area where there's landscaping inside the buffer, and that's what we do as a practical matter. With regard to the foundation plantings, we're perpetuating a theme of having a canopied structure. We're not seeking to eliminate foundation plantings, but rather to move those plantings on the west side of the building, which is the side that fronts Michigan Road, to pull those plantings outward from the building into beds where we're planting native grasses, which I am told are feather reed and prairie drop native grasses, into those beds that you see in front of the buildings. They're lined up so that they don't interfere with access to the individual storefronts, but at the same time are not located under the shade of the canopy tree, under the shade of the canopy, and otherwise obstructing access to the businesses themselves. Some of the plantings that would have otherwise been included in the foundation plantings have been relocated, and those include the plantings that you see that are delineated in purple. So we move those from the foundation plantings to the east side. And then on the north side, we relocated trees to the north side of the building that would have otherwise been located in the 6-foot planting strip. We have robust landscaping in the area along Michigan Road, but the additional or extra plantings that just can't fit, we've located along the north side, because the intent has never been to skimp on landscaping. It's rather been to carry out the intent of the ordinances and carry out the template of this development, which has gone on for the last several years, this being really the last piece along Michigan Road. Go forward to the next slide, please. Those are the 3 variances. We've covered those at length. Go to the next slide. This shows, I think it's optically useful to see. This is the view from the north end of the development looking back south, and you can see the landscaping between the parking lot curb and the pathway. The pathway is a 12-foot pathway that's inside of a 20-foot right-of-way that itself is inside a 30-foot buffer. So there's ample distance and landscaping between the parking lot and the adjoining trail improvements, far more than you'll see elsewhere along Michigan Road. Again, I wanted to note the overall number of plantings is not reduced. I should also note that in 2020, this was articulated as being the new standard for the Appaloosa Crossing development, and we've carried that forward through with each petition since that time. If you go to the next. This is the foundation plantings. We do intend to use, as part of the landscaping treatments, flower boxes that we show on the south end of the development. So we've got, just to go around the building, we have flower boxes on the south end, akin to what you see here is what we're proposing. We have the plantings that we've pulled out from underneath the canopy where we're putting the grasses, and we maintain the foundation plantings on the north side and on the east side. We have them. Our variance doesn't encompass those additional those facade sides where we fully comply. We go to the next slide. The last requirement is, and we wrote a letter about this, and I know I've talked to Corporation Counsel since our submittal of this letter, is the requirement that we seek a variance to locate plantings within an easement. And I simply want to make part of the record that historically this has been dealt with in Zionsville as a property ownership matter, where if the consent of the easement holder were obtained, we were permitted to locate plantings inside easements and do all the time. Zionsville has robust landscaping requirements. It is often the case that perimeter buffering requirements overlap with the location of easements. The easements themselves are not located across the middle of the property. They're oftentimes located in the same area where the perimeter buffering is located, and so it's common to locate landscaping inside easements, subject to obtaining the consent of the easement holder. I show this picture because this is a picture of the shops further north, where we have existing trees in an easement. The Culvers immediately north of this parcel also has trees located, I believe, in the exact same easement, in the Trico easement. And Trico has, it's such a routine matter that Trico has a kind of a process for it where you seek their permission. They gave us in writing approval, and they send you a subsequent encroachment agreement essentially that governs the terms, which we're happy to sign and submit to staff. The hardship is that we don't have anywhere else to put it, and the easement location itself is something that's out of our control. That's where Trico determines to put the sanitary sewer lines, and we're simply making a dual use of that area that it would otherwise be unavailable for any other productive use other than the location of a sanitary sewer. And to give you just a little bit of an idea about why I think this is elevating form over substance is, I have also been told that a workaround, should this variance not be granted, is that we could simply go back and have the instrument that creates the easement for Trico named something different, so that it allows them to place their sanitary sewer line in that area, but also expressly permits the location of landscaping within it, which is, to me, that's just another way of saying the easement holders provided consent. And I talked to Corporation Counsel about that this afternoon. He believed that would be a workaround should the variance not be granted. But we believe that we meet the intent of the ordinances, that the reasons for these variances are not within the control or because of some action that the developer has taken solely, and that the external factors taken as a whole do constitute a hardship, have constituted a hardship, that it would be a particular hardship at the very end of this project to stop this element of the development in its tracks. A development that's been supported with tax increment financing, a development that is an attractive and important commercial node in our community, and for reasons, I think, that provide no particular benefit to the public other than to impose a very strict reading of the rules without any regard to external factors which have influenced how this development looks today. We respectfully request your approval and would welcome the opportunity to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Are there any questions for the petitioner's attorney?
Mr. Price, the picture you showed with the buffer zone and the 6-foot strip between, it would look at this end of at the south end of the development, just as the rest of it does.
Yes. Yeah, that's our plan.
And the reallocation of the landscaping materials that you had set forth in the early days of this have been put in the other locations, in some cases to the north, in some cases to the east, I think, and south.
Correct.
Okay.
And part of the logic behind that was, at least that again, I can't get into the minds of the prior boards, but part of the idea was that landscaping being moved, for example, to the east, helped screen between our residential uses to the east and the commercial uses along Michigan Road.
Well, I just wanted to confirm that because I think Mr. Taylor and I are the only two people sitting here tonight that were here when this was approved.
Right.
And I remember asking the question, are you intending to continue that same logic as you move south? And the answer then was yes, and I guess it's still yes.
It is. It is.
All right.
In fact, we viewed it as a mandate that we were not to depart from that. And it has been, I think, I would put it this way, kind of trust and verify that as each proposal has come in, it's been verified that what we're proposing was consistent with that original template.
So in my mind, at least, this differs in that you're eliminating part of what would have been a buffer zone and using land that the landowner there is the same as the developer. So that's the difference in this lot, is that you now are going right up against the boundary of that lot on the south side.
No, I want to clarify that, I apologize. No, on the south side, we're fully compliant, so we're just incorporating the adjoining property into the buffer as we're permitted to do by ordinance. Yep.
And that's what I meant. I guess
sorry.
you said it better than I
No.
did, but yeah,
Okay.
okay, so. And I think our questions at the last meeting were really centered around what's going, how are you going to buffer that portion of the building, which you've given us the additional plantings and so forth. And I think there was also a question about the planter boxes.
Yep.
And I assume those are maintained by the building, or the owner, the development owner, and so they're seasonally changed and continue to, rather than having dead grasses or plants in there, they are updated and refreshed and.
Yes.
Okay.
We have a declaration that governs the development that includes maintenance of landscaping.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions?
In the right-of-way planning for putting landscaping into that area, and they have to come in and rip that line out, who's responsible for replacement of that landscaping?
So,
Is that yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, relative to that is precisely what TRICO specifies, right? Is that if they have to access their easement to, for example, fix a sewer line, and they damage your landscaping, that's on you. They're not assuming any liability for that. So that agreement would maintain that status quo.
Okay.
Yeah.
How wide is that easement, Mr. Price?
I think it is 20 feet. My civil engineer, Greg Snelling, says 20 feet.
And are there any limitations to what plantings you can put in that easement? How deep is that line that runs along that easement? You said it's a sewer line, correct?
Correct. They have not specified, to my knowledge, any type of a limitation on species, and they've seen our plan specifically. They just didn't view it as a conflict for what they're proposing. And it's not a clay sewer line or anything, so I think they have less concern about any kind of root damage or anything like that.
Right.
I can, as a TRICO customer, I can tell you, they're very liberal in terms of how they allow you to landscape their easement, because our entire neighborhood has trees and all sorts of plantings right on their easement.
So the line must be at least 3 feet because of frost, right? It has to be at
Oh,
least
yeah.
3 feet.
Oh, it's deep.
Oh,
It's
deep.
probably 8 or,
Yeah,
yeah.
depending
Out
on-
there, it's,
Yeah.
do you know?
We just confirmed that
Yeah.
the sewer line is 12 feet
12
deep at
feet,
that
okay.
location. Yeah.
Because we have a pipeline going through our property, and believe me, they are much more fussy about what happens than that right away, I can tell
Well,
you.
as are some of the sanitary sewer utilities are they limit you on species of trees and so forth, and TRICO is much more liberal.
So it seems to me that at our last meeting, we had also a discussion about the detention pond and the plantings that were going to go south of that detention pond. Is that still the plan?
It is, but what we've done is we've taken some pressure off of that south property line by being able to put additional plantings along the north side of the detention as well to kind of spread it out and frankly provide, I think, a more attractive layout of the plantings and also the ability to maintain those plantings better. Yep. That's something we reworked after we met last month.
No, I appreciate the changes in the landscape plan and coming back and giving it to us in hard copy, so to speak.
Yes.
And I appreciate your attempt at Midwestern equestrian architecture out there, honestly.
Yeah.
Given the context across the street, we're holding on to everything we can in town,
Indeed.
especially of that character. We do appreciate that studio access attempt at it.
Thank you.
That is a nice Midwestern attempt, not trying to fake Kentucky or something, you know.
Right.
It is. No, I appreciate that they went above and beyond and did your best, I think, with the site that you're gonna get, so.
I-
Guys,
I really do.
yeah.
I was a little concerned about that south retention pond last meeting as well, and left and thought about it. I drove by several times, and I'm real happy with what I see on this. This is really going to add quite a bit to that south approach at least. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So is there any further thinking that needs to be done with regard to the easement and the permissibility of plantings in the easement, or is that?
I think that they're asking for the proper variances, so I think it's ready for your vote.
Is what they have gotten from the easement holder there sufficient then in your mind for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah, thank you for reminding me. Is there anyone here who would like to speak either on behalf or against this particular petition? Sorry for not having asked. Do we have anybody online? No? Thank you for reminding me. All right, any further questions or discussion?
No, that's good.
You looking for a motion?
Looking for a motion if you're ready to make it.
I move that docket number 2024-19-DSV development standard variance to eliminate the foundation planning required for the property at 3295 South US 421 be approved as presented and described based on the findings of facts in the staff report, submitted findings of fact, substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right, the first variance is approved. Further motion?
Move the docket number 2024-19-DSV development standard variance to eliminate the 6-foot parking lot perimeter planting strip required for the property at 3295 South US 421 be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations and the submitted findings of facts and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Last one.
Last one.
I move the docket 2024-19-DSV development standard variance to provide for landscaping in an easement along the eastern property line for property at 3295 South US 421 be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, submitted findings of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried. Good luck with your project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good? All right, the next item on our agenda in new business is docket number 2024-31-SE, Coons Agriculture. And this is a special exception. Is the Coons family related here? Good. All right. Staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am. This is a companion petition to the next agenda item.
Okay.
The first one that we're discussing is the special exception. It'll address the use of single-family residential and ag zoning. The following petition will address development standards. So speaking on the use of single-family residential in the ag zoning district, we looked at two things really to guide our decision-making. One was the comprehensive plan, Two was the surrounding land uses. The comp plan recommends ag in this area, which ag does allow for clustered residential zoning, which is what's being proposed. So in regards to the special exception, staff believes this does align with our comprehensive plan. It's not going to adversely impact property values or the surrounding area. So for the special exception, we as staff support this request.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff, Mr. Smith? Okay, if the petitioner is here, please, if you would approach the podium and give your name and address, please, for the record.
Hi, Dawn Coons, 10025 East, 200 South. And we are requesting a special exception, as you heard, for a 3-lot residential subdivision in the general ag zoning. Currently, the lot is 68 acres, and we are looking to split that into 56 acres approximately, and then 7 acres and 4.6 acres. As you've read, Coons Ag owns and farms the ground where this is, and our goal is to keep farming the ground, and hopefully our kids will one day do the same. Our farm has endured some hard times, which is kind of what has brought us to this situation that we're in now. But our goal is to save as much farm ground as possible, and to maintain the rural character. My husband is a 7th generation farmer in this area. It's something he values, and it's something that means more to him than the money. We've had several people, several large developments approach us about buying all 80 acres, and that's not what we want to do. And so we're doing our best to maintain the farm ground and still productively farm with that. I did want to point out the comprehensive plan, which Jonathan mentioned, that this is consistent specifically with maintaining the viability of existing county agricultural activities, providing for farming opportunities for future farmers, allowing current farmers to realize the monetary value of their land. The findings of fact you saw before, it won't be injurious to the public health. It doesn't offer injure or adversely affect the adjacent area, the property values. In fact, the value of the land and what we have listed it as was very high and should increase the values of those around us. We do have that land on contract right now. And then selling the 12 acres will allow us to maintain the 56-acre parcel that will be left and maintain the rural character that's in that area. We did have 2 neighbors that showed some concern about this. One neighbor lives right next to us. And Jonathan, do you have the picture of kind of the layout of the property?
I can pull it up.
Sorry, I should have warned you about that. But basically, the neighbor right to the east of us, who is on 200 South, it's a heavy wooded line down the property on the east side. But there is a portion of their yard that in the winter, there's a little corner that they were concerned that they'd be able to see the driveway. Sweet family, someone who's been there for years, and so we worked with them and said that we will plant a few small trees that will fast growing, that will hide that little area that might see the driveway. So you can see their property is up on the right-hand side of that. We did have somebody else approach us, and they live further down on the property, and it's the one that kind of has the weird angle. So Jonathan, if you put your cursor back where it was, right there, it's their property right there. And they had requested that we put a 100-foot buffer into our property that wouldn't be used for anything, which is 25% of the width of the property, and that's not something we felt like we can do. The good thing is the potential buyers of this property, the whole reason that they're coming to this place is because they want seclusion. They're currently in a subdivision, and their desire is to maintain as much tree cover and barriers as possible. So I think as we move along to the platting process, that the 2 of them can work together to make sure that that protection and that barrier exists. The goal of the buyers is not to take much of the trees down at all, but instead to create a small area for their house, for an area to be cleared for their house, and then for another house. You'll notice there are two plots here for those houses. We appreciate your time, and just request that you approve this special exception.
Thank you, Mrs. Coons. We're very respectful of anyone who can continue to farm in this day and time. We realize that's not an easy occupation, but we're very grateful for the work that the farmers do to feed us. So thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Coons about this?
No, I do sympathize with her though. However, net farm incomes are down the last 2 years drastically. I'm afraid if we're going to have farmers left in Zionsville, we're going to see more of them coming to us with petitions such as this, trying to maintain a family farm and have to compromise something by either selling off some portion of it to maintain some of the tillable or not. It's going to be very, very tough times in production agriculture for the next couple of years.
So you'll take some small amount out of use for farmland and for the driveway,
Yes, that driveway just at the front.
pretty minor.
Yes, 45 feet of property, that's the requirement for road frontage, so we're taking as minimal amount as we can. But in all honesty, we've kept that space open this year because there's a drainage ditch, not a drainage ditch, a drainage tile that goes back from our farm that my husband needs to access anyway, so it was a way to get to it.
I agree with
Further-
staff recommendations.
Yes,
I agree,
yeah.
yeah.
Are we ready for a motion? Sure. Oh, sorry, thank you. Is there anyone here who would like to speak?
It's a small crowd tonight.
Yeah, I know. My apologies for forgetting to ask. I'm thankful that I'm getting reminded. Anyone here who would like to speak on behalf or in opposition to this petition? Mr. Price?
Price, I'm here on behalf of the wheat holders, which are the neighboring property owner that Mrs. Coons mentioned, had concerns and we made a written request for private commitments to establish a buffer between the to-be-developed residential lots and the wheat holders' existing property, which has a horse barn on it. And as we understand the site plan, it appears to be running a driveway just right along the back of their property line. And I believe that the cart is before the horse here. If the purchaser's desire is, as stated, to preserve vegetation, create a buffer between these two properties and assure that the driveway doesn't have an adverse impact on the wheat holder's property or their use and enjoyment of their property, then I think we ought to be able to negotiate a written commitment that would assure that that in fact takes place. And we made an initial offer. If they'd like to counteroffer, I think the issue with delaying it to the next stage of the development process is that once the plat is filed, there's really no statutory basis or basis under the ordinance to require that property owner to negotiate with us, because as long as they meet the standards for the subdivision, they're entitled to split the lot. And so we think the time is now. My clients are approaching this situation in good faith, have nothing but goodwill towards the Coons family, and we're simply asking that this matter be taken in the appropriate order. We were disappointed that the petitioner did not see fit to have a dialogue with us about this buffer before now. We tried to engage them in a conversation. We think that should take place before the approval is granted, and I can make a similar statement as part of the next petition for a variance as well, but appreciate the time. Thank you.
So just to be clear, you're representing, the family you're representing objects to having the driveway run along that property line? And they're asking for
We're
a
asking that-
100-foot buffer?
We're asking for a buffer between the driveway that would run behind their property and their property line, yes.
And this is a driveway for 2 homes, correct?
Correct. They've got a 45-foot frontage. We're not sure how that driveway is being finished. We're not sure what vegetation is going to be removed to establish that driveway. We think there's a substantial change in elevation as the properties move from east to west, and so that in fact there's going to be significant amounts of vegetation removed. And we think it's the appropriate time to have that discussion is now.
And so does this family that you represent, is their property backing onto the wooded portion of this property or the field portion of this property?
I think what the aerial showed is that was along the wooded portion.
And so their concerns are that these trees and the vegetation would be clear-cut
Clear-cut.
for the,
We're being told something that we like to hear, which is that the purchaser would like seclusion and would like to preserve those areas. And we're saying if that's accurate, let's put that in writing, because that would make my clients feel better about preserving their own property values. And I think it sounds consistent with what the petitioner is saying their buyer would like to do. I think when those two set of facts converge, there's no reason why we can't work that out ahead of time. That would be the normal order.
so I'm not clear which property I'm looking here at the aerial. and
Yes,
I'm
I'm
not
lost
clear
too.
Could you tell us, yeah,
which property you're
are we
talking
about?
That one right there? That's
One right
highlighted.
there.
Thank
Okay.
you.
It has
Yeah.
access off of Michigan Road.
Okay. And so I'm looking, and the house is in the middle of that property. The thing that they're worried about is their horse barn that's at the back corner. Is that a horse barn I see at the back corner?
Yes.
And that's what they're worried about, is that somehow that's going to disturb the area around where their horse barn is.
Correct.
Because it's not close to the house. This
Well-
driveway would not be close to the house, it seems, based on the photo I'm looking at.
Not close to, it doesn't appear to be close to where they live, but it is running a driveway along the back of their property. Yes.
Right. Any questions for Mr. Price? Remonstrance? Anyone else who would like to speak? Thank you. Okay. If you would give your name and address, please, for the record. Thank you.
Hi, we're Mike and Tracy Panunzio, and we're at 9393 Pleasant View Lane in Zionsville. And we are the folks who are under contract to purchase the Coons property if this goes forward. And this is the first we heard about the request for the buffer, but I will just tell you that it's not so much that we want seclusion, it's that we love the property the way that it is, and what we love about it is the trees, and we want our view not to be the back of their horse barn, but to be the beautiful trees that are currently on the property. So I think it's deceiving when you look at this. You don't realize that that's a long way. The 12 acres, it's a long way. It's much larger than a front east to west than you would think for a yard in any larger yard subdivision. So the drive that we have, the driveway that we have shown in pictures maybe that they have seen is just limited by like what you can do in Microsoft. I don't expect that the drive would be all the way up against their property line, and I can't imagine a scenario where we would cut down the trees in between the two properties. So, if that helps.
May I just add
Sure,
one,
please
one
do.
thing? May I approach the television, and I don't have a pointer.
Sure.
Can you put up that last? So,
The rest of us aren't going to be able to see what you're pointing at now.
apologize. Or maybe Jonathan, if you could sort of mimic what I'm showing here. So here is where the driveway effectively would end along the east property line, and from this point it would come down closer to where the house would be, which is sort of in the center of this southern lot here. Right where the arrow is where the house would ultimately be. This whole area behind the other owner's home is all wooded and provides a pretty significant buffer. Now if we go back to the other slide that you had up a second ago. So, and what this shows here, this just demonstrates the 45-foot strip of property that we intend to purchase from the Coons in order to locate a much smaller private drive. The private drive is not intended to be 45 feet, but 45 feet is what's required for the private drive to come off 200. So we intend the drive to be the minimum because paving costs are very expensive. So we intend the private drive to be the minimum to support the Zionsville Fire Department. and to support electricity that has to come down along the side of that drive to get to the two home sites. And Mr. Chairman, the question that you asked, this is a private drive that by the time it reaches that horse barn will be going to one home because the other home will already have come off.
Okay, thank you, that helps. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you give your name and address, please? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Niesink, and my address is 10214 Fox Trace in Zionsville, 46077. And my property is adjacent to the petitioner's lot on the south end. So my house abuts, my property line abuts the petitioner's property. I and my wife are very concerned about the quality of the house product that will be put up there and the positioning of the house, which we've just learned a little bit here. This is getting pretty doggone close to where our house is. Now, there is some buffer there with trees, but based on the house being where I just heard it's going to be, that's going to be pretty doggone close. So what we would like is some guarantees, as Mr. Price's clients do as well, as far as making sure that we can maintain our privacy. If you, Jonathan, it would be the south, one more over to the east, or to the, there you go, right, there you go. That's our property. As you can see, it's very close to where the potential owners want to place a house. So we've lived here for 28 years. Love the neighborhood. It's been great to us. The privacy is excellent. We understand change. Change is coming. But we don't want to have that adversely affect the valuation of our house. So in order to not oppose the special exception, we would like some guarantees as far as how we're going to keep our privacy and the use of what's going to happen with the potential buyer's house.
Thank you.
Yes.
It appears that you have a wooded area on the back of your lot, is that correct?
Correct.
And how deep is that?
It's 100 feet.
100 feet of woods?
It's 100 feet of trees, and correct, it's woods, but we've cleared everything out, so it's more like a park.
What's the setback requirement for a lot?
Depends on the zoning, but a standard, typical rear setback would be anywhere between 20 to 25 feet, depending on the zoning.
And a lot that size, it's most likely going to be much greater than that.
Well, it depends on the zoning, not necessarily the size. So,
No, I'm just saying in practical terms, it's likely to be much greater than that. Yeah.
The only exception to that setback requirement is for accessory structures. Think barns or horse stables, things of that nature. In that case, it's 5 feet.
Topographically, there are some challenges with that property just to the north of us. But again, we'd like to maintain relative to what we have right now from a privacy standpoint. That's kind of what sets our parcel apart from many of the others in the neighborhood, even though it's a little bit different.
Thank you.
Probably
Thank you.
any of us could understand your desire, but you must understand that unless you got a guarantee when you purchase that property, you don't know what's going to be behind you at some point.
Well, I think as Mr. Price's clients would like some kind of guarantees right now, as far as in a planning process, let's make everybody happy up front versus having everybody say in the rear.
Well, I think you've heard the folks who are interested in purchasing this land
Yes.
saying that their intention is not to be clear-cutting all the trees and so on, that they are interested in keeping it as wooded as possible. I think that's probably a lot better than you might hear from other developers and folks that might be interested in buying a piece of property. Also, these are fairly large parcels. The southernmost is 7.38 acres, and that's a fairly sizable piece of land to build a house on. So we have somebody else who would like to speak? I do. Please, if you give your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Kim Reinhardt, and I'm at 10086. I'm next door neighbors with Tom. The only concern that I'm thinking of is a floodplain. It's considered a floodplain behind us. So I'm just questioning, like, what can you build on the floodplain, and how far back can you go, and how many trees? Because we too have a back woods of trees. So we're the house next to Tom. Yeah, that one.
Sure. Yes, please, Mrs. Coons.
Jonathan, I see the creek on the GIS. Do you have the real floodplain and hydrology? Can you pull that up on yours?
Unfortunately, when they downloaded my GIS, it has not got the floodplain on it. I can add a layer real quick. I know how to do it, but it's going to take a second, so it's probably not going to be
I can tell you where it is.
Your
Okay.
connection
Yeah,
might
go
be
ahead.
faster than
The
mine,
only
'cause I was gonna do it
floodplain-
for you.
The only floodplain on
Please
our
do, though.
property is the southeast corner. And you can kind of see the little lower ground.
The little blue.
Again.
Well, it's blue. I'm sorry.
Southwest.
Southwest.
Yeah.
That is the only thing that's ever shown up as a small area of floodplain.
Okay.
So that looks like on the soils map, because we've lost that layer apparently on GIS. It looks like the west side of the proposed lots would back up either to a small drainage swale that's in the woods that gets wet. Is that how that's oriented? What is
Yes.
down there?
Yes, but it's also, it's not a small, it's a very steep.
So they wouldn't be able to build at the back.
I
of
wouldn't
those
think so, but
proposed
that was our
lots.
question, is just making sure that
Yeah.
we have the protection of trees, which when we bought the lot, which we've been there for 30
The
years, so.
topo's not loading
So-
either
Yeah.
for me.
So-
Is this
Anyway.
Mr. Coons? Okay, would you can give your name for the record, please?
Craig Coons.
Thank you.
Address is 10025 East 200 South, Zionsville. In regards to his concerns, there is on the back side of the property a ravine that runs east-west, and then it has a buffer before it gets to the property's line. So there would be no development or no building that can be
The west
done on
side.
that side. So it's kind of a self-buffer. And that Nunzios are fully aware of that ravine and what their limitations are. So, in regards to his buffer, in spots it might be, but it is
Please, I'm
100
sorry,
feet.
if you have comments to make, if you would address from the mic and not from the,
So, anyway, there is a ravine, there is a natural buffer. It might not be 100 feet, but it's a natural buffer.
okay.
I do not know. I think so in most areas, I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. Further comment? Questions?
Cutting a 45-foot driveway through a woods, you're going to need to clear, that's an older woods, it's going to need to clear more than just 12 foot of that. It's going to have to be cleared to put a driveway in through there. I know the fire department had some concerns a few years ago trying to get into a lot where the trees were overgrown going back in there, so they're going to be very conscious of that going into these things. So, Mike, what's the requirements of how wide when we put a driveway in and you're trying to maintain a tree canopy? I mean, is it 20 foot? Is it, I mean, because I'm envisioning like a 20, 25 foot cut going back through this woods, which seems okay. But I didn't know, I mean, is that roughly what it is, or?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at these photos, and it seems to me that the homeowners who are asking questions are buffered on their own lots with trees and distance, and that I don't see that any of this, even cutting this driveway for a single or even two homes, is not going to have a tremendous amount of traffic coming and going.
No.
And I can't imagine that that's going to be disturbing to the lifestyle of somebody who is as far away as these homes look to be in the photos, and granted, I'm making a judgment based on the photos we're seeing here. And particularly in the first remonstrant, whose house seems to me remarkably far away from where this is going to be happening. And it's only a horse barn that's in the back corner that may be, visualized. So I think I understand the rationale for selling this property. This is non-viable farmland, and it's an opportunity for someone who is farming that property to be able to make some money.
It could be farmed, it could be tree farmed. They can come in and clear cut every tree out of it.
That's right. Well,
And mulch everything else.
right.
Looks like a lot of
and then
sycamores
put-
and
yeah.
scrub back there. It's not gonna give you much
But, I
money.
mean,
So-
it could be used in a fashion for an agricultural gain. It hasn't been. I hope it doesn't get to that, but.
Well, it seems to me that this is a way to be able to make some money off the land that they own and still be able to continue to farm.
Mhm.
So, other thoughts?
The only, one thought I have, and it's really more of a question, and that is that Mr. Price had indicated that weed holders would like some assurance. I don't think that, I doubt that that could be done tonight. So, just that either it gets approved without that, or it gets denied, or it gets continued, but it won't be everything to everybody, I don't think. I don't think that's possible.
Well, and I wonder if a 100-foot buffer is reasonable.
I don't think so, but, I mean, it would be if you had, 10,000 feet to play with, but it, as the property owner said, I think that's 25% of the width. So I don't think that's reasonable, and I can't even say that it would be rational to expect that behind a horse barn.
Right.
Behind a house, yes, but, and as one of our former members used to say, you don't own the view.
Right.
That can change, and you may have no control over it.
Jonathan, the surrounding zoning on this property is all R1, 2,
It looks like it's all ag.
so it's all ag.
Yep.
So there's really not, it's not like we're going from one zoning jurisdiction or level to
You are
another.
not doing a rezoning.
Yeah.
All you're
But
doing is allowing a use
Right.
through
So that's
a
probably
special exception.
Okay.
You're
R2
not
maybe?
changing the underlining zoning.
But my point is when we go from a different class of zoning to, let's say if it was commercial or R2, there are different setback requirements.
Yeah,
You
each
change zone
zoning
types.
district is going to have
So-
setback requirements that they have to adhere
Half
to.
acres at the most,
This is
yeah.
not a rezoning, so it would have to adhere to the ag setback requirements, which I can pull those up relatively quickly if you would like. But yeah, you're only speaking to the use right now.
Okay, I'm maybe getting a little ahead of myself, I'm sorry.
Are we ready to make a decision?
Would the petitioner agree to any buffer size at all, or is having one and discussing one off the table for you? I mean, I know we can't probably decide tonight, but some people have occasionally volunteered. Not tonight, okay.
Well, I think what you're talking about is cutting into their viable farmland, I mean,
A
essentially.
little bit, that tree
Yeah.
line and the wooded area extends a little bit deeper than those lots.
Just a
I-
note that the
that-
the driveway, so to speak, doesn't have to be linear, right? It could,
Yeah,
it could conform to the, avoid the use of the farm ground and then cut into the woods.
yeah, I just agree that they're gonna have to clear a lot of
Yeah.
that to get a road through there. Those are big mature,
Yeah.
those trees. And if you don't clear them, they'll probably die on you. So I do understand their concern.
Looks like there's a lot of dead trees in there already.
Yeah,
Well, my guess is
it
that,
is right on the edge.
my guess is that the purchaser has already walked that ground pretty thoroughly and knows pretty much what's in there and what work is going to be required. So, willing to take that on.
Here's a thought. This is the special exception. It can be approved, which still means that you can't do anything unless you have the second variance approved. We could go ahead and act on the special exception, move on to the next. I think there's legitimate concern by the neighbors to know what is going in. Not that they necessarily have any control over it, but there is concern, and if there's a willingness for the seller and the property owners there to discuss it ahead of time, they might reach agreement that's satisfactory to all parties. But this first one, I don't think guarantees anything other than you can do it by special exception. So we could go ahead and put a motion forth on the special exception petition, and that wouldn't guarantee that we get to a motion on the second one. Oh, well, we'll get to a motion, but it could be a continuance.
Yeah. I see your train of thought on this one.
But the second development standards variance is 4 to 3 to 1 lot depth to width ratio. So
Yeah.
essentially by granting the special exception, aren't we allowing, no,
Got to approve that too.
right. Well,
Maybe a word from our counsel on this, if any of these trains of thought are completely off base.
Well, I'd look at your factors. So the factors for the two cases are different, and the factors here on a special exception are, will it be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare? And your second one is, will it injure or adversely affect the area or property values? And lastly, again, we don't see a lot of special exceptions, but is the use, is it or will it be consistent with the character of the district and the land uses authorized in the comp plan? And again, I think that that's what you should think about when
Right.
you're making a decision on this case. If there are other things that will come up in the variance or a development plan or whatever, that's for a different day. For right now, I just would draw your attention to those, and you've heard presentations and testimony, so I think that you ought to look at those three factors and make the best decision you can.
I guess I would advocate that conversations between the petitioner and the neighbors would be ongoing, and that we would hope that they would be amenable to reaching some point at which they could agree on, what would be acceptable. But on the other hand, we cannot put a, what do I want to say? Thank you. A condition on the folks who want to build a house on this property that hamstrings them into, what the neighbors want. So there has to be a give and take on both sides. And it seems to me a little bit irrational to be worried about the driveway affecting the horse barn. But I can understand the neighbors who are on the south side worrying about what they will be looking out of the back of their homes. But I also think that parcel, the southernmost parcel at that size, is a pretty large piece of ground. It's probably not going to be something that's built right up against the property line anyway. So, I don't know.
I don't think the topography of the property allows very much to be built along that south property line. And the more you look at it, without getting elevations, it looks like there's a pretty significant drop, almost a dry creek bed or something that may run along the back side of that. So I don't see those folks losing their views from the south property owners necessarily. I respect their concerns, but I don't think it's going to affect their views any on a 7-acre lot. I don't see it being too big of a concern.
Well, we always hope that two parties who have something in interest can come to common ground. I mean, that's always our preference. I guess I see the first petition here as one that they do meet, I think, in my opinion, and staff's opinion, I guess, they do meet the requirements. And I don't know that there is a reason that we should continue this or for the sake of what we know is an issue or a concern by some of the neighbors. That the first petition does not grant them the right to go ahead and build. There is still the DSV must be approved also before that can happen.
Right. Well, that's a discussion yet to be had this evening, I think.
Right.
So are we ready to make a motion with regard to this?
If I could ask one more question of the property owners, are you willing to sit down and talk with the parties that have expressed concern?
Yes, we are. And in fact, when Matt sent me the information, I reached out to the property owners personally. And I met with the property owners, not met with them, I talked to them even before we proposed this, let them know what we were doing, and their response was, okay, when you get a buyer, please let me know their name. Of course I would do that. We believe in this community and in being a good neighbor. So yes, of course we're going to talk to them. I know the Penenzios plan to too. Absolutely. We are agreeable to discussing this as we go along.
Right. Thank you, Mrs. Coons.
If you're ready for a motion?
Absolutely am, yes.
I move that docket 2024-31-SC special exception to permit a minor residential subdivision consisting of 3 or fewer lots at 10155 East 200 South be approved as presented and described on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations and the submitted findings of fact.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henshaw. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Thank you. So we have first variance is granted. Sorry, special exception. Thank you very much. What would I do without you? Okay. That brings us to docket number 2024-32-DSV, and that's a development standards variance. And Mr. Smith, if you have a staff report, please.
I think we've discussed all of the specifics here, so I'll just jump right to staff's positioning in regards to the findings. For consistency, staff has repeatedly said that hardships should not be self-created. And we've had numerous petitions similar to this with 3-1. In this case, again, we believe the way they've laid this lot out is a self-created hardship. And because of that, we do not offer a favorable recommendation for this request. Again, happy to answer any specific questions you may have related to any of the other information.
Questions for staff? I do have a question, and that is with regard to the hardship parameter. Given that this is a piece of farmland, and the need to sell off some of the property, you would sell off the land that is not viable for farming, and that sort of defines what property would be eligible for sale. And because of the way this property is laid out, if the woods were on the upper or the northern part of the property, there would be no problem. But because the woods is on the southern part of the property, it's created this problem, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
So that's not defined as a hardship? I mean, it's a fact of...
I mean, they could, it's an economic factor, I believe, which, you know, they could adhere to the letter of the ordinance by making, as you said, the front part closer to 200 where the two homes go. But doing that would eliminate farming ground. So it's understandable why they moved it to the back, to the area that they're currently not farming. But there has to be something unique that's not self-created. And the driveway and that long flag lot that they've created is self-created. It's unfortunate,
Well,
but
this-
it doesn't change the self-created nature of the way they've subdivided the land.
Well, this seems to me to be the only feasible configuration which preserves farmland, which is what they're intending.
Which is the great part about the BZA. Y'all have the discretion
Right.
to be able to,
That's exactly
y'all have the
true.
discretion to be able to interpret it
answer,
how
John.
you would like.
Yeah, well s-
Staff
well
has
said.
to- Staff has to
Please.
try to be consistent, and that's where we're
Yeah.
at.
I'll help Jonathan out a little bit here, since he's on the ropes, but it's a very good point about discretion. Well, one of the things is this, where does this 3-to-1 come from, or what is the purpose? And the reason that you see these in zoning ordinances is because the idea that you don't want multiple lots on a county road or a city street. You know, you're trying to get the subdivision of land to have fewer cuts on the road. This is the general idea of these. Are we after one particular geometric shape? No, it's all about that. And so in this case, where you're being asked to balance that idea versus really what amounts to the preservation of productive agricultural land, I agree with Jonathan, you always can use your discretion when you look at these things. You have discretion. And the BZA is unique in that. The Plan Commission doesn't always have discretion. Sometimes it has no discretion, as Josh can tell you. Sometimes it has wide discretion. But there's a balancing, there's a tension here between this idea that we want to limit the number of cuts, so we don't want narrow lots. And then the tension between that and what's the best for this site. And again, I've said this before to you, that many times what your job can be, if you want it to be, is what's the best thing for this particular project and this particular site. You have all your cases are tough. You had an earlier one tonight that could be viewed that way, but you do have discretion to say, look, we think this is different. And under the hardship analysis, it could be said, this is from the petitioner's point of view, this is the only way they can make it work.
Right.
They didn't choose to make a long lane. This is just the only way they can make it all work. I think that's what we've heard them say. So just a reminder about that. What's magical about this 3-to-1? Where does that come from? And I think if you remember that, it allows you to work through the process a little better. And so Jonathan was gone. I agreed with everything you said.
Thank you.
If I could add, the 3-to-1 also, we see a lot of these in agricultural communities where you'll see a row of long, narrow lots. And just historically, in often cases, that the back acreage eventually gets neglected. Right, the property owner maintains the front, they have their house, they have the little backyard, but then the back half of that lot gets neglected and gets into weeds, you have weed abatement issues, and so that's why often jurisdictions will place a limitation on the depth of the lot, because over time, there's a tendency for people to start neglecting that back acreage.
My understanding is also in zoning that you want to avoid a lot of these for emergency response, because it creates a lot of long, skinny alleys and lanes with multiple houses back there. That can be very difficult. You get that fire truck in, but you also have to get it out, and multiple vehicles out. Will they be requiring turnaround space at the end, in the end lot, that needs to be cleared so a truck can make a 3-point awkward but possible turn? So
That's a good
it
point.
does mean a little more is cleared, because that is a long lane, and we We have amazing emergency service. I see them go by my house. It's always 3 or 4 vehicles at a time. So,
Well, they'll have to do what the fire department requires.
yeah.
And so, that's the answer to your question is.
Yeah, that is another reason we avoid them, though. So,
Right.
and that is more area they'll need to clear than perhaps they imagine of their just house and little driveway. It's gonna need, it takes a lot to turn a fire truck around, and so that one will have some space.
Okay, we'll ask the petitioner to come to the podium again, please, and once again, identify yourself with your name and address for the record.
On Coons, 10025 East, 200 South. And actually, what I was going to say is a lot of what you guys were just saying. The only thing I do want to add as far as hardship is I believe the 3-to-1 variance is the hardship in this case. Because if we were not to do this, we'd be taking farm ground. And the comprehensive plan is about preserving farm ground. And so the two are really at odds with each other in this situation.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Coons? Any more comments from anyone who is opposed to this? Mr. Price?
Yeah, just for the record, I appreciate the dialogue of.
Would you identify yourself, please, again?
Sure,
Thank
it's
you.
Matt Price, attorney for the Mr. and Mrs. Wheatholter, joining property owners to the east. I think what we've been, we do believe this will damage our property or my client's property. We reached out to, my client had reached out to the Coonses weeks ago, and we've been assured at various times that there was in fact going to be a commitment made relative to some buffering between their property line. And we made a proposal in writing when we didn't hear back. And while we like the things that we're hearing, we just don't understand why, if the intention is to preserve some buffer, why that can't be put into writing today. And I don't think it is entirely reasonable to say that because my client has trees on their property that the adjoiner to the west, who is seeking a variance, very creatively put, but seeking a variance nevertheless to install this very long driveway in a location that appears like it's going to go right up against the rear of my client's property line, which is, I think, an unusual configuration even in rural areas. And so I think where we are on it is let's put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to get this variance and the subdivision and sell the property and make a nice profit in return, then let's take reasonable steps to be respectful of the adjoining neighbors, and we can negotiate on what the right buffer is. We're not trying to do anything unreasonable, but we just feel like that dialogue hasn't taken place, and in fact, we've been kind of assured things, but when it comes time to put it in writing, there's a step away from that. And really, after tonight, there is no incentive to sit down, because they can file a conforming plat. They'll be approved by the Plan Commission, as they rightly should at that stage, and the opportunity to have these commitments in place will have been gone. And I'm not sure I understand exactly what the rush is. If we had additional time, I think we could at least attempt to work out a set of reasonable commitments that would allow neighbors to work with each other as opposed to one another, particularly where it's very unclear what the intention is. And I believe that the topography, they know very well what the topography is. I think there's going to be a lot more tree clearing than what's being spoken about tonight, and I think that's precisely why the parties would like to understand more fully what's being proposed.
Further comments from any remonstrant?
Thank you for the opportunity. Michael Panunzio, I'm one of the proposed purchasers that have the contract, that have the property under contract. Mr. Price, you haven't walked the property, have you? Have you looked at the topography of the property?
Do that. He has to talk to you.
So you're really not in a position to comment on.
Sir, yeah,
After
hey,
on-
you
on-
need to.
Address us,
Sorry.
please.
You
Right,
need to address the.
but I'm
board.
just trying to make the point that.
Well, you can make it differently.
So I believe the concerns are unfounded, and here's why. One of the main reasons why we can't commit to anything as it stands right now is because
we haven't gone to through the planning process yet, and we don't know what the requirements are going to be for the driveway. We don't know what the requirements are going to be from the fire department. And in the center part of that south lot, there is a stream bed that forces us, because the property is graded from high on the east, and it grades down toward the stream bed as you get to the middle and west side of that property, which is why the driveway is on the east side of the property. That was not our preference, but that's really the only high side of the property where you can put that driveway. As far as the house, a 100-foot buffer would force the house to be in the middle of the stream bed. There are some cleared areas now. There are some clearings on the property now. I don't know if anybody's aware of the clearings that are there now, but there are some clearings there now, which is where we intend to locate the house in the current clearings. So there really would be, from an additional clearing standpoint, that would be determined by planning and the requirements that are placed by that, and certainly have no intention to clear more than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Niesink, and you have my address. Just to make a couple points, one of which is the old 3-to-1 thing. We are looking at 20 times a 3-to-1 ratio here, okay? That drive, based on where that house is planned to be, is going to be close to a half mile, all right? So good luck with the snow cleaning on that one, but despite that, for your fire truck scenario, is that a good place to put a house a half mile from basically nobody with a single access? It seems I'm stymied by why there is a 3-to-1, although I hear some explanations up here. And we would allow, the board would allow a 58-to-1. I mean, doesn't that, to me, it seems like anybody could put a house on any piece of farm ground a half mile off the road anywhere in Boone County. Is that what the board wants? I mean, that's the questions you need to be asking. We're going to set a precedent here, right?
No, we will not be setting a precedent.
This will not be a precedent. There are
No.
lots of homes built considerably off the road as far as a half mile, because that's where people want to be in some cases.
I don't
So,
see anything
and
around it.
that's not ours to judge. That's their
Right.
choice.
I just did not see that in the flagged documents that were part of the petitioner's package. Anyway, food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a lot of topography.
I know, but I understand there will be complications, but those are not ours to deal with. Those will be the things that the purchaser will be dealing with as they go forward making their plans. I don't know that I've heard a lot of talk about a buffer, and 100-foot buffer was thrown out. That seems to me to be.
That is a lot in a 400-foot lot to have a 100-foot
Yeah,
buffer.
I mean,
is-
that's not reasonable, and I hear Mr. Price saying that they've been having this discussion, but I haven't heard a number aside from 100 feet, which I think is unreasonable. So I don't know what number you're talking about. Why don't we agree to some buffer? What would that look like with your client?
Well, I think we were, the reason I was brought in is because the weed holders originally attempted to negotiate this on their own. And I believe the Coons family represented that there was going to be a buffer of some kind. And what's happened up to this point is there's been no commitment of any at all buffer. And all I'm saying is I think this deserves a meaningful discussion about how these two properties function together if we're going to have this long driveway that extends all the way back to their horse barn. And that would be, in my opinion, that would be the ordinary course of business. They are asking for an extraordinary item of relief, and it's reasonable to at least have discussed this with your neighbor, particularly when your neighbor, I haven't been charged with the goal of stopping this. What I've been charged with is, can you help us secure some reasonable buffer?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Price.
You know, my thought was, with the special exception, was that it did not allow them to do anything in terms of building. And I think there are reasonable arguments from both the neighbors and the property owners that my suggestion would be to continue this with the expectation that those discussions start taking place and that they come back with a decision that's acceptable to both parties before we consider the design standard variance.
Yes, please do, Mrs. Coons.
I'm really disappointed that a neighbor would come forward and say something that's not true. There have been no discussions, except for me to reach out to let him know we were doing this, and then for him to say, let us know when someone buys that. So I'm very disappointed in that. That's not how you treat neighbors. We are very reasonable people, and we are willing to work and negotiate with people. Time is of the essence for us.
Right.
As a farm, it is of the essence. And we could continue it. That puts us in a greater hardship. And we are not selling off this property. If we sold off this property, it would be developed every inch of it, and the neighbors would not like that result.
Right.
So I feel like we could be making millions by selling this property, millions, and we're choosing not to keep our rural character the way it is. And so I ask you to not continue this and allow us to go forward. We will work with your client. I guarantee it, and I guarantee my husband will agree to that, and he does not go back on his word. And so I'm willing to set up a time with the buyers and with you. If you want to set a date right now and contact your client, let's establish that. But I'm asking, let's go forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Coons. My own feeling about this is that I think some of these concerns are, the fact that there is a person worried about the driveway getting close to their horse barn, which is not close to their house, strikes me as being a little unreasonable, I would say. I understand that the neighbors are used to seeing woods behind them, and they enjoy the fact that there's a woods there, and I completely understand how that is. We had a woods behind us once upon a time, so I understand how it is when that gets changed. But I also think that listening to the purchaser of this property, that they have every intention of preserving the trees. They're not looking to come in and whole cut the forest to build a house. And I think the idea that you can sit down together and try to do what is the most agreeable for all of you, but ultimately they have the right to sell this property and someone has a right to buy it. So I guess.
Can I ask a quick question,
Sure.
staff? If this were sold and it turned into a residential development, what would the buffer yard be next to ag? I'm making you look it up and on the spot.
Well,
so
that,
sorry.
that would assume they rezoned the property to some sort of,
If
some sort of residential zoning. Let me look real quick.
yeah, just
But that area that's south of this property is probably R2, right?
It's ag.
it's
We
all
looked
ag
that up
around
earlier.
them.
It's all agriculture around there. Even the houses to the
Even
south.
south,
is-
that's ag.
Just
According to what we looked up
trying to
earlier,
ballpark
is
what
agriculture.
reasonable would be.
Right.
Right. 'Cause I
So
understand
according to
the
our
figure.
chart, let's say it was R1 single family. Let's say they rezoned it to R1 single family to allow a major subdivision. When they abut ag,
Worst case.
it's AG, which if you go down here, it's 40 foot. Well, I can't highlight it because that's a picture, but here's my cursor.
And that's
Can you go back up? So if it was from ag to ag, what would be the buffer? Because that's what it is currently.
Ag to ag is the same.
And it's the same, all right.
Yep,
Thank
ag
you.
to ag is AG. Which is 40 feet.
I do feel like asking for more than that is unreasonable. You know,
I would-
according to our, so And it's not, right? This is a different kind of use scenario. These are great big lots that do fit in the context, but I would have liked to see something, because I do understand that that's a pretty steep grade. There is a ravine, and maybe the current owners love the trees and don't want to clear cut, but the next ones could of these lots. And so I understand that fear. I'd love for him to find some middle ground, and starting at a reasonable point.
Kathy, I don't disagree with anything you said, but I would say too that driveway and allocating what they have allocated to driveway space, not knowing what's going to be required by the, public safety, I think there's some work that has to be done in order to know that. And the reasonableness of how close any future home would be to other properties or the driveway to other facilities, other accessory buildings, that can be worked out between the neighbors. That has to be done with them. But I just question, if we were to approve this tonight and they found out that that's not enough to put a driveway in there to satisfy public safety, then where are we? I think that's a step that needs to be included, and it's not been done yet, as far as I can tell.
So your concern is that it may need to be something that is positioned differently or is wider?
Is the width adequate all the way down there? It's a long, long drive. I don't know what the topography is, or none of us do. So I think that, but the other is, we've heard from two neighbors who are concerned about keeping some distance between what they currently have and what will be there, or what could be there, that too, I think in fairness to a potential buyer of this property, if they want it, they need to know what kind of restrictions are going to be there. You've got one willing couple, I guess, that have seen the property and say that's what we want and know they can make it work, but it might be difficult to market one when you say, well, there's, some neighbors don't want you here or there. You need to know those things before you start putting stakes in the ground. So I think if those things have to be decided, it would be better decided before we make any final determination on the petition for a design standard variance.
Well, how is that decided? How are those things, in other words, how do they decide if the neighbors are going to say, ultimately, the neighbors' input is appreciated, but it shouldn't be the only deciding factor about how things are done on that piece of property. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I fully agree that a driveway that gets close to a horse barn, it's not even close to the house, is not reasonable.
Right.
But nonetheless, the present owners can establish that agreement between themselves and the neighbors that have expressed concern, and put that into the contract then under which they sell the property. And the property owner at least then knows what they're getting. They know if there are any restrictions and what they are.
Right. Well, it sounds as if Mrs. Coons has had those conversations with at least the neighbor with the horse barn, but has not had satisfaction.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you how many times we've seen when neighbors think they have expressed their concern about something, and it turns out they expressed it to the other neighbor, but not to the people that needed to hear it.
Right.
So, I don't know who's at fault there, but they have a concern and it's legitimate, so there should be an opportunity for them to know at least that they have an ear to listen to say, here's our concern, and rather than oppose you, we'd like to have an agreement that is satisfactory to both of us. And I know that there's a interest in settling it this evening, but frankly, I'm not, I just don't see how that's going to happen.
Other thoughts? Anyone else with a?
No, I'm with Steve on this. I think anytime a developer would come to me in any fashion, and I hear that they haven't talked to the neighbors about something, whether it's true or not, it's disappointing. I like to know that everyone's kind of clear and knows what's going on or what's going to be coming into an area. Well, I don't like the idea of a continuance on this because I know time is sensitive. I struggle with how we get around that as well.
I can understand the need for some kind of resolution on the part of the petitioner, because obviously they would like to be able to sell the property and get on with their farming. I can understand that completely. And this probably feels a bit like waiting in molasses for them. I think I have a little bit of a difference of opinion with regard to the neighbors' feeling of almost a proprietary view of this property, that they've gotten used to having these woods, and so the idea that there's going to be something in that woods that's going to change is almost as if it's their property, or they've enjoyed the benefit of having it and are worried about how that's going to change. But I also know that this does not seem to me to be, as Ms. Coons mentioned, it could be a lot worse if that land were sold to a developer who wanted to put 100 homes on it. And those woods would be gone, as we've seen in other places in town. So
There'd be a 40-foot buffer with sticks,
yeah,
little tiny trees in it, not a forest.
Yeah.
This is
So,
right across from Bradley Ridge, the south side of Bradley Ridge. It's right across the street from this.
yeah. So it's kind of, I guess in my view, I don't know that, I mean, I think we take the best, the word of the petitioner and the family that's contracted on this, to buy this property, that they will make best efforts to do the right thing with the neighbors. They have no reason to offend everyone that lives around them as a starting position. Perhaps I'm a Pollyanna, but I'd like to think that they will make best efforts if allowed to just go forward.
I'm afraid
But-
best efforts without any sort of guardrails is sort of a recipe for disaster, right? Without having had any kind of feasibility study of how that drive goes in there and how it turns around at the end. You have best intentions, right? People buy the lot, but then push comes to shove, the engineering gets done and everything gets cleared because there's no other way.
But the problem with that thinking is that then they must invest in doing the studies and all the things that are required. They have to invest in having that done, and then they have to come back and get the approval that the 3-to-1 ratio is not, you know, they get the variance. So you're asking for them to do the technical work and then come back and ask for the variance if in fact it's going to be.
It would be easier to commit to a small reasonable buffer so no one had that, right? Because otherwise they're relying on the best efforts creating a buffer rather than a commitment to a buffer, so.
Well, that buffer you talk about, we don't decide that.
Right.
No, we don't.
And I don't think it's going to happen right now with the huddle.
Right.
First of all, I'd say the 3-to-1, as far as I'm concerned, they have met the requirements in terms of the unnecessary hardship. I think that we always get hung up on that, thinking it's got to be something grave and somebody's going to die if we do the wrong thing, and that's not it at all. There's all kinds of unnecessary hardships, and this is one that I think can be used to satisfy the requirement, in my estimation. I have one vote, so I'm not concerned about that. But it is all the other things that are not known, and I think that the adjoining property owner should be aware that they might not get anything, period. They don't have to. They've got buffers already there. But I think when you've got willing neighbors to talk about, to make sure that, they at least maintain good neighborly relations for people they're going to live next to afterwards, makes sense.
But I want to remind you that we have certain basic questions that we need to answer in our decision-making. And those questions have to do with the adverse effect on neighboring properties, health, safety, welfare, and so on, and also the hardship question. Can we answer those questions and resolve this particular petition and allow other things that have to happen downstream to happen in their due course downstream? Because I'm not sure that there are things that we're going to resolve, and I think we've seen, and the Kuntz and also the family that wants to purchase this property have seen who the players are that need to be in the conversation. And that will be in the next step for them, I would think. And with regard to what the driveway looks like and how much space is needed, that's not something we can resolve. We're only answering the question about whether they've met our criteria for this variance with regard to the 3-to-1 ratio. So if we circle back to kind of basics, maybe we're in a place where we can go ahead and make a decision. Does that seem reasonable?
Don't disagree with what you said. I know that in the past we have, when there has been some opportunity for gaining agreement between a petitioner and a remonstrator, we've chosen to take that path.
Right.
But we don't have to. You're right. I mean, if we all feel comfortable that all three of these findings are in fact in favor of the petitioner, we could make a decision tonight. You're right. And then let them worry about the scuffle that takes place afterwards.
Well, there may not be a scuffle. There may be a meeting of the minds.
Discussions, whatever.
So,
Moving forward with this, it's going to come to us at the planning commission level for a primary plat development plan as well down the road, isn't it? So it's gonna be
yeah, but
reviewed again, and there's going to be some.
Well, it's going to be, it's essentially, you're going to ask, do they check all the boxes? And if they
Yes.
do, it's not going to be a robust discussion like you're having tonight. It's going to be, do they check the boxes? If the answer is yes, you must approve it. So it's not, the discussion at Plan Commission is not going to look like this.
No, I'm well aware. I was just asking what the next steps are. We're going to see it still on a primary development.
So they'll have to approve the subdivision through Plan Commission. Once that's approved, then the builder or the owners can come through and apply for building permits. Those permits will be reviewed to the zoning standards, the development standards that correlate to that zoning. That's where we'll get into the tiny details about building height and setback requirements and lot coverage, things of that nature. Next step, though, is Plan Commission approval. So.
so can we come to some decision about our action? For the sake of.
When you get back to our three criteria, I think I can put my head around this now. When you bring up a very good point. When you get to the three criteria we're looking at, I can get my hands around the hardship on this one. Staff agrees with the other 2 points on this. So what I'm looking at on those three criteria, in my opinion, they have met it.
And I'd agree with that.
So.
Number 2 is the sticky one, the user value of the area adjacent, but those are all big lots. They could,
Yeah,
I know, they could buffer themselves.
I'm not
and
convinced
preserve.
that it's going to be.
I don't think it will really detract, they won't like it, but I don't think it will really detract from the value
No.
of the property. So, yeah.
We ready for a motion then?
Make sure I'm on the right one here. 32, right? Yep, 32. I move that docket 2024-32-DSV, development standards variance to exceed the 3-to-1 lot depth to width ratio for property at 10155 East, 200 South, be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations. submitted findings of facts, substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. The variance is approved. Thank you. Good luck with your project. Okay, the next item on our docket is number 2024-29-DSV, Timothy and Jody Davis, Development Standards for Variance. Are the petitioners here? Great. Hang in with us. Thank you. Staff report.
Yes, ma'am.
Smith?
So, as you said, this is a development standards variance. Once again, focusing in on the 3-to-1 depth-to-width ratio. To jump right to staff's positioning, I guess to give you a little historical context, if you look on your screen, the right of the screen, you'll see the original layout, the original subdivision. I'll let the property owner speak to all the historical dates and all that good stuff, but essentially this request is going to revert the picture on the left that you see of the subject site back to its original configuration, which is what you see on the right of your property. The dimensions are, again, didn't bring my glasses, I believe that's 161 by roughly 1350, which is around an 8-to-1 ratio. As opposed to 3-to-1. The lots were merged prior to being incorporated into our jurisdiction. And because of that, staff feels like that is the unique hardship created that was outside of the petitioner's control. They were merged for tax purposes when it was in the county's jurisdiction. Outside of his control, he was brought in under our jurisdiction, which then forced him to be in compliance with the 3-to-1. We feel like that is a hardship in this case. We do support allowing them to split this parcel back into its original configuration. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions from staff? No, the petitioner is here. If you would approach the podium, please, and give your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name's Tim Davis. I'm 6905 South State Road 267 in Lebanon. The property was originally divided into 7 lots. The 2 outside lots were 7 acres and the 5 in the middle were around 5 acres each. That was in 1973. And then in 1988, my father-in-law split the property next to him with the neighbor on the other side. And then in 2006, that neighbor moved and sold the other half of that property to my father-in-law, in which he in turn in 2010, he merged all the properties into one under it to be basically he could merge it in as a farm so that tax purposes and such. So with partly his health issues and us being able to help take care of the property for him so he can stay there for a longer period of time, we were going to subdivide the property back and build a single-family home on that second lot. There are pictures of the plot plan, and then once that property is subdivided, what it looks like, which is basically what's on the right on tracks 4 and 5.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the petitioner? This property has taken a circuitous route, hasn't it?
Full circle.
Discussion, questions?
This is the development pattern I was mentioning earlier, where you see this historically,
Yeah.
these long, deep lots.
Any discussion? Are we ready to make a motion? Oh, sorry, thank you.
We're on.
Is there anyone here who would like to speak on behalf or in opposition to this? I'm sorry, I'm really, anyone online? No? Okay, thank you for the reminder.
I'm
Okay.
ready to make a motion.
Are you ready to make a motion?
We're-
All right, good.
You can stay. I move that docket number 2024-29-DSV Development Standards variance to exceed the 3-to-1 lot depth to width ratio for property at, 6905 South State Road 267 be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations submitted as findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Ms. Hinshaw. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Good luck. Yeah. Okay. Be careful.
I know, it's slippery sometimes out there.
You ready, Mr. Smith?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-34-DSV. Lisa Rollins, is the petitioner here? Yep. Okay. Staff report?
Yes, ma'am. If you look on the screen, you'll see hopefully a quick snippet summary of the proposed project. This is a development standard variance, section 194047 specifically, addressing maximum lot coverage. This zoning district allows for 20% total lot coverage. You'll see the equation on the right, which equates to 38%. I will say the driveway and sidewalk, just as a side note, should not be calculated into lot coverage. But that number, instead of being 38%, should be 27%. Still over, but it's not 38%, it's 27. That's what I was just jotting down on my math. I didn't notice that until I was just looking at it. Anyway, they're exceeding lot coverage. You'll see they are removing portions of the wall and portions of an elevated deck to provide room for the proposed addition. You see the setback lines. No issues with the setback lines. I'll skip to staff's positioning. Again, we don't believe this is going to adversely impact the surrounding areas or negatively impact the welfare of the community. But we do believe it is a self-created violation. And based off what we've said again throughout this meeting, hardship should not be self-created. To be consistent with that approach, we believe this is a self-created problem resulting from their desire to build this addition rather than configuring your project in a way that complies with the zoning ordinance. We don't believe it's the zoning ordinance creating the problem. We believe it's the project, which is self-created. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for Mr. Smith, staff? Not with the petitioner, would please come up to the podium, please, and give your name and address.
Thank you. My name is Andy Cash. I reside at 212 Redwood Circle in Noblesville, and in attendance this evening also is the owner, Mrs. Lisa Rollins. And I want to say, I missed that about the driveway not being a part of that calculation. So I publicly apologize to you, Lisa, because I stood my ground to think that it absolutely was. So we're in a little bit better position, but still, as you mentioned, we're over. If you could, Jonathan, just flip to the rendering for the building, the architectural rendering, just quickly to get a sense of what the structure would look like.
There we go.
So that's the garage addition there to the right on your screen, or maybe one or two other views. It's consistent with the existing structure. And, yeah. And that would be more from, I believe, what, the northeast corner. Yeah, then there's the south side. So, you know, I can say that, you know, the structure fits in the setbacks. It's not encroaching any easements. I also might add that this has been presented to the HOA Architectural Review Board. I believe in your packet is the approval letter for that. And then if you can flip to that overall view. I might add that, you know, the addition is on the south side of the existing structure. There's really only one neighbor that would be impacted. And I would just point out all of the open space and common area around the property to that pond. So if you were able to look at all of that area, it's a much smaller percentage of impervious surface for the project. So I believe it's, you know, it's an aesthetic requirement that's being imposed on the property. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cash. Are there questions for?
Is the entire additional garage, is,
Lisa, you might want to.
Yes, please. Please give your name and address for the record.
The renderings are all we have at this point.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, Lisa Rollins, 4603 South Cobblestone Drive.
Would you speak in the microphone, please?
Sorry, thought I was loud enough. So the front part is for additional garage space, and then because we want to maintain the integrity of the front of the property, we've looked to put additional space on the back of the garage to give us that bonus room. The additional space we're seeking for our expanding family. So it's not all garage footprint. There is room at the back of that as well.
Thank you. Further questions?
I have a question for staff. Were the renderings included in our package?
These we just got today.
I was going to say, I've never seen those.
No.
We got them today. We've started going, well, as you know, we've gone digital. So there's a point where we cut off receiving new information. And anyway, long story short, when we get people that want to present information after that cutoff, we tell them you need to present it as, well, I used to say you have to print off a copy and hand it out, but since we're not doing handouts anymore, I had him send it to me this afternoon, and so that's how we go.
That was an oversight on my part. I knew the main topic of discussion was the impervious surface area of all of these plan views. I surveyed the property and put together the site plans that you reviewed, and just at last minute thought I think it would be good for you to see the rendering, so I'm calling.
As you know, one of the criteria is that denial needs to be, create and what do we call it?
Hardship.
Yes, a hardship at a
Practical difficulty.
the hardship. And I haven't heard anything about a hardship. So I'm not sure what hardship this would create if we denied it.
An effort was made to describe a hardship in the application you were provided. Subjective and different for every
I did see that, but that, it's a bit lacking. It really didn't describe any hardship other than you'd like to stay here and invest in your community, but that's not a hardship.
Well, the need to relocate if they would, as an unnecessary burden is the planned
That
expansion.
would be discretionary.
Right.
I'm a little confused on this building addition as well. If the front house is going to be garage and the back house could be an additional living bonus space, how do you access the back of the garage? Is there going to be a hallway that goes back? Because, I mean, cars come in the
Yeah.
front.
There is an existing side door to the property that actually takes you to the outside at the moment. That would be covered by the garage, so you'll be accessing it through an existing door.
So
that's
come,
already-
to access the back rim of the garage, you'd have to go through the garage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question for staff, because I can't read tiny text and I can do the math myself here tonight. It's less than we thought before, right? The
Right.
coverage. What could they build to get to the maximum allowed?
Great
Just out of
question. Let me pull my
curiosity
numbers
to
back
see
up.
what the difference is between that and what's proposed.
2017.
So I can't see anything tonight, I'm sorry. I would look it up myself. Squinting at the tiny text, even when I blow it up.
34, 25.
Somewhat
All
limited as
right.
well of where they can fit the structure,
Yeah.
on the existing structure because of the roof lines and the
Right.
architecture. But I'll point out that they are removing a portion of the driveway to do that, so that does help out with that calculation.
So their existing lot coverage with everything as is 3,425 square feet. 20% coverage of this property, which is 16,942 total square feet, would allow them to add an additional 36 square feet.
Oh, okay. That's how the new math goes.
They're at the
Yeah.
20%.
They are there.
at-
They are at
okay.
maximum lot coverage as
Okay.
built.
So this additional is essentially
It's-
7% of the lot coverage.
Now, you do have to take into account, which I don't have the numbers here on my screen, they are removing a portion of the
Right.
block wall and a portion of the elevated wood deck. So that small section of decking, even though it is elevated, it does count toward lot coverage. So that small section of decking that they're removing will add some number to that 36 square feet, but I highly doubt it's going to be enough to change the outcome.
27% is easier to think about than 38%.
It is.
For sure.
And you've had approval from the Architectural Review Board in your neighborhood.
That's right.
Do you know if they, have there been many other homes that have had additions
Yes.
put on?
Yeah, there's 4 other properties that have 4 other properties that have completed their build in the neighborhood on similar sized homes and plots.
Sure, please do.
If I could ask, just to clarify, visually, the area just to the south of your lot, or to, I guess if you're looking at your front door to your left, that's common area, right?
That is common area.
And so if I were looking at your front yard, then to me, there's no house to your south. It's wide open.
It's wide open.
And nothing can be built in the common area. And then there's the lake behind it, is that correct?
Yeah, it's a retention pond
So,
behind it.
yeah, we look at these drawings all down, but if I were to, there would be there would be open space there, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I just asked that question because lot coverage when you look at two-story homes, it's about massing,
Right.
you know, and proportionality. And so, so yeah, I think that common area plays in here a little bit for your consideration.
Well, and I would say also with regard to drainage and any other, with additional hardscape and footprint, you know, often there are created problems with drainage, and you don't have a lot of neighbors around where that may be an issue, so, yeah.
I think I know where the water goes here.
Yeah. How is the common
that blue
area
place.
used? Are you aware of any future little parklet or anything that's going to go in that common area? It is
No.
wide open, and that is the community
is.
view to the lake.
It's
so.
community access. It's used,
Okay.
you'll see some vehicles cross it every now and again to go and maintain the pond.
Mhm.
And obviously, if there was an emergency, they would access it through that as well. It's been planted up with trees
Mhm.
since the HOA took over it more recently. Sorry, since the new HOA sort of worked through their various projects. So it's got some young trees in there now,
Mhm.
which will hopefully mature up and just make some wind.
I would guess that common area is a lot that can be built on because it's so close to the intersection. I mean, that's that's kind of the way I look at how that lot is. I'm with you. The lot coverage isn't, 7% isn't too concerning to me with the additional common area. It's just, I'm still struggling with the hardship.
It is hard to.
I mean, I'm just not seeing any hardship in it, in this, so.
We've also discussed additional plantings along that south side, even if it wasn't a requirement for the plot plan for the residential building permit. I believe we want to commit to additional plantings if it would help this evening.
It is a large addition. It's not just a garage or something, so it's really hardship of both the garage function and the family room function that you need to.
From our perspective, we have a
Yeah.
growing family. I've now got 3 teenagers in the house, and one of which was about to get her own vehicle. So the garage really, with the winters being as harsh as they are, and obviously I'm not local, you know, we want to make sure that our vehicles are garaged, especially with young drivers out there. These are not necessarily always the best conditions to have kids wandering out in frozen up cars. So that the garage is really to help support what is going to be the next 5 years of teaching kids to drive.
Good
Make
luck
sure
with
they
that.
stay-
Yeah.
Stay stuck to the road and nothing else. So that's really the intention for the garage. We also recognise now that the age at which our children are likely to leave the home has significantly increased from
right.
when I was young. So we want to be able to give our kids the flexibility to stay with us as long as they might have to. Not that they might want to, but as long as they might have to. So that's really the reason for adding that bonus space at the back. Our kids still have quite a number of years left, if I take the youngest one, to go through the Zionsville school system. And I don't want to take them out. I don't want to relocate. And quite honestly, moving within Zionsville is very expensive, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep them where they are. I want to keep them in the same schools. So whilst my eldest might be off to college in a couple of years' time, my youngest is still going to be here. So that's really the challenge for us, is making sure that the property has aged appropriately as our children have and not leave.
The staff report indicates the house is 5,669 square feet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Could you ask that question again, Mike?
The staff report indicates that the size of the home consists of 5,669 square feet.
I think I read that, and then I read someplace else in there
The
that
footprint.
that included things that weren't house, I believe. I think that, and I don't know that I could go to it.
Including the attached garage?
Yeah, I see right here, existing house is 2,710.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
An attached
2710
patio.
driveway's 1950.
So when you're looking at this number, I don't mean to interrupt there, but when you're looking at this number, it's only for lot coverage, right?
Right.
So the 2710 is just going to be if you were to walk around the footers of the home. So the first
That's
floor.
the living area.
It's the footprint.
Well, it's going to be the footprint, right? So
Okay.
it's going to be the first floor footprint. It's not going to calculate second floor or third floor or possibly even basement, finished basement. When we're calculating lot coverage, we just want to know how much grass is being covered. So that's
Right.
what that 2710 is likely reflecting, even though the property record card could show that it's 57 or 5,000 whatever square feet. So just to hopefully clarify that. That's where you're seeing the discrepancy in some of the numbers.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that I'm struggling less with 27% lot coverage than I was with 38% lot coverage. And I understand the discussion about hardship, which is a different, in the eye of the beholder to some extent perhaps. But I do understand the point of the complications of having to find another place to live and stay in the Zionsville school system and so on. So with kids that are getting older. But are further thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a softie for garage space. You can never have too much. But
I think I heard you say something like that
Doesn't
about
want to park
pools,
next
too.
to a teenager.
I've never seen this man drive the same car twice.
It really does
you
look.
can have more than 3 or 4 cars, though. So I do have a soft spot for anyone that wants to garage their car. But at the same time, it's, that really is not what constitutes a hardship generally. And I don't believe that, Cobblestone Lakes has had problems with flooding, although they have had some. But it's been years ago. To the best of my knowledge, I've not had any since then. But that's, compared to the village, for example, that still is kind of sparsely covering a lot. Yeah, the hardship is a difficult one. I can feel for all the things that you experience with 3 teenagers living at home. But it's quite a leap to consider that all of that constitutes an unnecessary hardship.
Well, I suppose one could say that it would be a financial hardship to have to relocate if in fact you don't have the required space with kids that are in their teens. But-
It is a large home, though.
Yeah.
And typical of the neighborhood. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not any smaller than typical there.
Yeah.
I agree, the massing looks good. They're frequently denser.
Families with 3 children are a common thing in Zionsville. That's very, very common. To have
In
3
this size
children
home.
and a house that is
Yeah, most people.
of that size, that's about normal.
And most people are concerned about having enough bedrooms,
Yes.
not enough garage space. Have we asked for remonstrators yet?
Oh, no, thank you.
Online, I guess.
Getting reminded from all parts here. Do we have anybody who wants to speak on behalf or as opposed to this petition? Do we have anybody online? No? Okay, thank you for the reminder.
Do we know the age of this subdivision, if the subdivision predates any change in that ordinance? My opinion, 20% seems a little low for upscale neighborhood like this.
When
I
you
would
think-
agree, it is low.
When you think in the village,
But
it's
there were a lot of
35%.
them that were built with those kinds of numbers. This was probably back around 2000, early 2000s.
It looks pretty typical of that whole area.
Where's Cobblestone?
Setback for the plat and a setback for the zoning ordinance and Shelburne. Just curious if they were held to that standard when they first built.
They look,
I was just curious if they were held to the first standards when these houses were originally built.
man, these footprints don't look any bigger than
I would say,
guess the answer is yes.
I'm looking for the property record card to see if I can see it, but regardless of what the standard was when it was built, even if it was built whatever the zoning ordinance, that, that would classify it as non-conforming, and by trying to improve this site, you would be required to bring anything new into compliance. So even if it was built whatever date this zoning ordinance was adopted, according to the record card, this was built in 2007?
The ordinance was passed in 2000.
Okay. So after.
Well, are we, thoughts?
If it makes anyone feel better, I would say that the lot coverage requirement is pretty tight. I live in a neighborhood that has fairly good-sized lots, but we've had people that, when they wanted to put in a pool, found out that they couldn't without a variance because it was, and I think ours was 25%, but it can happen.
Right.
It's, the hardship is hard to quantify for some people unless you happen to be there. If you're one of those with 3 teenagers, then it might be a hardship.
Well, we're talking about, it's not wanting to put in a patio for entertaining. It's talking about living space, essentially, for the family.
And the cars.
And cars, right. And in the wintertime, we can all agree that it's nice to be able to get into a car that hasn't been sitting outside. But are we ready to get to some kind of closure?
Well, let me make a motion and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
I move that docket 2024-34-DSV Development Standard Variance to exceed the maximum lot coverage for a property at 4603 South Cobblestone Drive be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, submitted findings of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Is there a second? No?
Sounds like no. Nope. Then there is grave concern about unnecessary hardship.
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
Since that one didn't get a second. I'll make sure I'm looking at the right one here just a second. I move the docket 2024-34-DSV Development Standards Variance to exceed the maximum lot coverage for the property at 4603 South Cobblestone Drive be denied as presented and described.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Henshaw. Further discussion?
This is a toss-up.
Yeah.
So probably the right thing.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So we have a 2-2 tie.
What do we do now?
So what happens?
Well, we've
Nothing has happened yet. A tie vote is not a yes. So and you didn't have a second for the other motion, so you've taken no action so far.
Can we make a third motion?
Yeah, you can make as many motions as you like. So
We can say what the heck.
I'm not
We're
encouraging
gonna
you.
have, we've got a fifth
Motion
member who's
doesn't
gonna be
matter.
here next month, and let's put him on the hot seat.
Yeah.
I realized it was gonna be a struggle, that's why I created that overall, showing all of that common area. I would really hope you take that into consideration.
let's see where we go. Is there
Yeah.
another motion?
Yep, I move that docket 2024-34-DSV Development Standard Variance to exceed the maximum lot coverage for property at 4603 South Cobblestone Drive be continued to the September 4th, 2024 BZA meeting.
We have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
The only reason I think we do have a fifth member of this board who will be joining us next month. He may be watching online. I know he'll watch this meeting, so he'll be versed on it. I'd like to get that fifth person in here so to break this 2-2 tie, so.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to continue, say aye.
Aye.
I guess we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
You will get to go earlier in the meeting.
You're right.
Yes, you'll get to hear.
Yeah.
You'll be up on the list, I promise.
Although it's been fun, I'm sure, hanging around. So, okay, other matters to be considered. We have our discussion about practical difficulty and unnecessary hardship, our favorite topics to discuss.
Right, the Plan Commission voted on the matter and forwarded a favorable recommendation to change the finding, the third finding, from unnecessary hardship to practical difficulty. In the meanwhile, I met with the board after that, and the board, the BZA here, asked me to ask the town council if they would grant more time before voting, so that the BZA could, wrestle with this question a little bit more, talk about it, and then I would report back to the town council based on the conversation tonight. Jason Plunkett, the president, did mention it's a little unconventional because, the process is for the planning commission to vote on the matter and for the town council to act on it, not to table the matter so that, the board could weigh on the matter. But they are, they have roughly 90 days or so in which to make a decision, and so they are giving you, they agree to give the BZA another opportunity to weigh in on this matter. And in the meanwhile, I think even during the town council meeting, there was one suggestion as a possibility. Is it possible for the village area to have, to retain the unnecessary hardship finding and the rest of the county be subject to the practical difficulty finding? And then following that, I talked with our legal counsel, and Dan, maybe you want to weigh in on that question.
Yeah, I just said that you may do that. Jurisdictions can assign different standards to different parts of the town. And you have a unique situation because the goals and purposes of the village are very different than the rural area. So I thought the suggestion was good, like it was a good way to think about it. It allows you to maintain a stricter environment in the village, which you've certainly heard a lot about, and slightly more flexible approach maybe in the rural areas, which you've also heard about. So you could do that. I agree with Mike. I thought it was extraordinary that the council continued it. They obviously want to hear from you, and I think appreciate your work.
I do think that it of all people to opine on this, probably we are the people most, or anybody who sits on this board are the most indicated for that role, because in fact we're the ones who apply it when it comes in the face to face with us. So I do think it's important that they hear what our thoughts are, how they are in the actual setting of having to apply them. But the one thing that I thought about these petitions that we had tonight, the last one was a good example of where economic practical difficulty would be the argument made by the petitioner for that problem of wanting to expand to put the addition on the house. Because in fact, the argument they were making was, if I'm not allowed to do this, I'm going to have to probably be forced to leave my house, find a house that's bigger. And I think that if we use that phrase, economic practical difficulty, we'll be seeing a lot of that argument. If you don't let me do this to expand my house or to do this or that, I will be forced to, move to another house or whatever. So.
But we still have the ability to be flexible. Right. Is it desire to have a bigger house? Is that being forced, right? Or is there an adult handicapped child or something that requires that space. And so that's still, we can still weigh that with practical difficulty. We're not forced into that by only undue hardship. We could still apply.
I think once you add the word economic, I think it changes the argument. It's not a practical difficulty that's offered by the topography of the property, but it's something that is created by the need to spend more or to use resources. And I think that's a little different, in my view, a little different shading, so.
Yeah, that is hard to split, because absolutely every improvement to a property increases its value, which not doing it is an economic hardship. So that one still bothers me, that it just economic means that monetary increased value or loss of the upside, right? Not increasing your property. That's always been my concern with this, is that I don't want to weigh that heavily on just economic hardship for that reason.
I don't think economic should be the sole arbiter of the decision-making.
Did the town council hear that
Yes.
from us and understand that was?
On the economic part, no. We didn't really focus on that.
Not that it was that
No.
specific piece.
I have thought about this, and my conclusion ultimately, I guess, was that either one will work. I think it all comes down to the people who are making that decision and trying to remain consistent and adhere to those factors that we need to adhere to. The one thing I don't like about what the practical difficulty, how it was prepared, was that it included significant economic injury, which I think could be made for almost every variance request, with very few exceptions. And and I'm not sure if this will work, but I have a proposal that says practical difficulty is fine with me to use in all cases, but again, it's going to vary as people change out on this board. But if you take the word economic out, practical difficulty means that significant injury will result from the strict application of the zoning ordinance, subdivision control ordinance, or other land use ordinance. The injury cannot be self-created, and there cannot be any feasible alternative to the requested variance. And economic injury must be demonstrated as real and present, not speculative. And the speculative part, I think, is essential, because you could say, I'm going to improve the value of my home, and if you're denying me the opportunity to do that, so I've lost out on an economic benefit or advantage in doing that. And I'll have to move to another place. Well, yeah, you will if you don't want to continue to live in that space you've got. But I think there's an economic advantage to virtually, I don't know what it is, 90-some% of all of the petitions we hear. So if you take that word economic out and then just put in there at the end, and I don't know if that holds water, but saying it's got to be demonstrated and real and present, not something that's speculative. At least you deny that argument that, you're denying me the opportunity to have a much more valuable home when I sell it. That's my concern, is that that will become the common argument, is that there's an economic disadvantage in denial.
I'll go back to several years ago to a large petition to the north here. Your argument right now, you would have passed it. You would have gone ahead on the solar farm, because the argument would have been of the landowners, you're hindering me from the economic potential of this property, and they would have gotten that through. I'm just using that or would they? I guess would they have gotten that through? I'm asking. I guess.
Yeah, you still got those two other factors which are pretty important. It's not detrimental to the public, and it's not going to have significant adverse effect on neighboring properties.
Yeah, but if it could have qualified on those two, then you get on the last one here, and it could have. I mean, I'm using that as an example of trying to play devil's advocate, I guess, and try to find where this could come back to haunt us.
Yeah.
I think the idea that you might have a dual layer kind of thinking regarding the village, because the village has historic context. And people that choose to live in the village need to be made to understand the parameters that are involved in living there, that the constraints are going to be greater than if you buy a house out in a newly developed area somewhere. And these are going to be parameters that are going to be very hard to change or to get a variance on. I mean, it makes sense to me that, I don't know that we want to lower the bar in the village if that's one of the fundamental parts of what makes Zionsville, Zionsville. I don't know, and again, that would be a big deal in informing people, because there may be some pushback about, why are there two standards, double standard here? But I think we will see, as Steve said, if you start implying that that it's an economic question, that most people would come saying, well, you're not allowing me to invest in my house. You're not allowing me to do what is the best thing for my asset here. And I think that'll be a hard argument to say no. So.
I support the speculative addition, because anyone could say anything in the future.
Well,
And we'll have to hear it over and over again, and we can deny it over and over again, but it's confusing for people, because it all very plainly looks like, well, of course it's an economic
Well, you
hardship.
remember when the self-storage area was up, and you remember they had realtors who were living in Stonegate who came and said this is going to impact to the detriment of Stonegate. I mean, there are people in that industry, so you have to think that they were informed opinions and not just, but of course they were also involved in living in Stonegate, so they were probably not completely objective.
Somebody living in Colony Woods came in and said they would have more water with me.
Well,
You know.
but, not to completely ignore their, but.
Dan, how much latitude do we have to define practical difficulty and unnecessary hardship? Can we invent our own, or?
Well, the definition for you is what the courts have said those words mean. You could redefine them in your ordinance and say, well, here in Zionsville, they mean something different. You can do that. The only problem is you're not gonna have any, if you, this is Anna Crum, by the way, works with me. If you ask Anna and I, what have the court said when they look at practical difficulty and they look at, there are no other alternatives, what have they said? We can tell you. Now, if you define it differently, we'll be saying, oh, well, there's no case ever on this because you're breaking new ground here. That's the only disadvantage. I would say this, I think you all make very valid points and you understand the issue. I will just harken back to your training and say that I want you always to remember that you have discretion, which means, it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do, but it does mean that if you find they're all three factors are satisfied, you can still say, no, I don't want to grant you your variance. You can still do that. That's what the law says. And I am so glad it does, because it leaves up to you what's the best thing for Zionsville. I think Kathy makes a good point, however, and that some of this is messaging. You have heard a lot from people in the village that they want a stricter environment, not a more flexible standard. You've heard that. I'm sure the town council has heard it, and the town council, they authored the ordinance with feedback from others, but they're the authors. So, the messaging of keeping it an unnecessary hardship is you are sending a message that it's going to be difficult to get a variance. Okay, so it's important to kind of remember. On the other hand, if you change the standard to the lower standard, although that would bring you in line with 98% of the legal jurisdictions in Indiana, I might say, that does not necessarily mean that you're going to grant every variance, because you'll know, because I reminded you, hey, I don't care what they say. I don't care. You'll have advocates get up and say, I can show that we satisfy these three factors, so you must grant my variance. And you can expect me to say every time, that is not true. You are not bound to grant anybody's request for a variance, even if they can show all three. It doesn't matter what the standard is. It's still, in the end, the cases have said over and over, it's still up to you. You work, we're talking about a very important role that you play, right?
That's how we get the big bucks.
It's like you get to the gates and a decision to be made. That's really what this is. So I don't want people to tell you, members of the community, members of other commissions, how you're gonna be locked in by either standard, because that's really not true in my opinion. You still, even if somebody can show all three, you still have to say, okay, that being said, do I wanna grant this or not? You still have that. And so I sometimes think that when people talk about BZA standards, they try to put you in a box. And I'm here to tell you, you will never be in a box. So give the town council the best feedback you can, but don't ever feel like that these standards put you in a particular situation. Like tonight, I thought you worked your way through that beautifully. You found solutions for things. I don't think you acted like you were too tied up. And that's good. That's when you'll do your best work. The outcomes of these cases
You
are
mean
not my
with the
concern.
horse barn and the driveway?
We shouldn't talk about specific cases.
No, I understand.
However, what I'm just saying is that kind of flexibility is good.
I guess I don't feel like the stricter standard has bound us up that much to give more leeway to the rural zoning, just because we can say what's undue hardship for rural agricultural use is different than everybody else's standard. And so I like the stricter standard because it lets everyone know going in, it's a high bar. And if it's gonna be an exception, it better be a good one, right, and a good reason.
And I would say
And I feel like that's not a bad thing in Zionsville, especially going through such big changes so fast.
I think it's been in the pretty recent past that we've really started to be more attached or more concerned about this. I think that there probably in the past, we were a little bit less engaged in that, and using that metric. So I don't think I think you're right, that it's not a bad thing and that people think twice. We had petitions where people will go and reconsider and come back and have made some adjustments to their desires in order to fit more closely and have the variance be
Or
approved.
not come back.
Or not come
We've
back.
had numerous ones that just haven't come back.
Right. But
And I think we, even though I still kind of agonize over certain things being an unnecessary hardship, is having an outdoor patio that exceeds lot coverage required to avoid unnecessary hardship? I think we've gotten to the point where we said, yeah, most people expect to have the ability to go out on a patio or put their car in a garage or any number of things that, in a global sense, you might say, well, that's a first world hardship maybe, but it's not a worldly hardship. But I think we've gotten comfortable with that.
It holds them to a reasonable amount of garage or patio.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, just wanting it is everything.
So like I said, I think I could go either way, but I would prefer to just keep the bar where it is.
So
And-
we need to give some kind of uniform message to be transmitted to the powers that be.
So, and I don't want to speak for the planning commission members at all, but I will say this, until I was at this level, I didn't appreciate the stuff that we reviewed to the level I do now. Like I said, I'm not trying to speak for planning commission members, but I think leaving the bar set pretty high, and not to say that this doesn't need to be revisited every so often. Do we want to lower the hardship levels or lower to the lower level for their rural area? That may be the case in a year or two. We're going to see a lot of stuff coming up, I think, in the near future, coming from out of Union Township, out of the Worth Township area, out of the Perry Township areas. It may be something we want to revisit again in a year, but right now I really lean towards keeping it as it is.
Should we maybe give some thought to defining in some general way what hardship equals? I mean, what that is? I mean, I think, we may all see that word and have different thoughts about what a hardship is. I
Well,
don't know whether
the terms are defined in the ordinance.
I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, we
Yeah,
do
I
have
understand.
that. An unnecessary hardship means that taking all facts, taken together, indicate that the property cannot be put to conforming use because of the limitations imposed by the zoning ordinance, subdivision control ordinance, or other land use ordinances. Hardship cannot be self-created. A mere showing of economic loss is not sufficient to establish unnecessary hardship.
So
And that's what the courts have said.
Right.
That's where that definition comes from. All those words come from some decisions, which I think does explain it a little bit.
So, do we have a consensus on what our thoughts are to be passed along to the town fathers and mothers?
I'd agree with what Josh said, that, you know, I was concerned with lowering that standard, knowing that I think most of the time, we have gotten to a point where we've been pretty consistent with it and recognize that the village and its entire, a big part of the resident base here is watching, and they want us to adhere to those things. And I think we've done a better job of that, just even, I even get irritated now when Andreoli comes, or anyone comes up with a, you know, some silly, unnecessary hardship reason. You know, it's just like, did you even think about this?
Yeah, well, it's a hardship because I can't get what I want sometimes is what it boils
Yeah,
down to, you know?
yeah.
I want to do this and you won't let me. So is that,
Okay,
does
well,
that
I'm
suffice?
hearing uniform agreement that this board would prefer to keep the unnecessary hardship.
I think that probably, you know, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, maybe to some extent, because we don't know if we open that door, whether we're going to find ourselves wishing for the good old days when we could be.
Yeah, and the board is grown, you know, accustomed to using the unnecessary hardship in making your decisions. Okay.
In staff's opinion, is there a big difference in how you'll have to do your recommendations if we were to change? Is that going, would that
If we
be
were to change, I
a
think
burden
that
on
would-
you to try
I
and
think there'd be
explain it to
some-
everybody and, you know?
If we were to change the practical difficulty, it would change our assessment, right,
Yeah,
in our
significantly.
recommendations, and it probably would, you'd see more support for more variances. You know, I think about the case sometimes we see where on a 5-acre tract of land, somebody wants an accessory structure larger than the primary, right? And it's 5 acres, but because of unnecessary hardship, it's hard for staff to support it. And why can't they, meet the criteria for practical difficulty? It's foreseeable that the owner can probably come up with better reasons that staff would agree with in supporting situations like that.
Well, maybe to some extent it forces petitioners to be more thoughtful about what they're requesting and what the motives are for the request. And so we may find that over time, as this becomes more and more the practice of the board, that the level of the conversations that we're having with these petitioners is elevated. I'm hopeful. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it would be helpful if staff would go back to some of the petitioners and say, you know, if you believe you have an unnecessary hardship, you better think hard and put it something better than what you've got.
Right.
Here's the
Because
definition.
it means that night, they show up with, you know, no plan to have any better unnecessary hardship explanation. And, you know, in the years I've done this, I've heard some where you'd say, it's medical issues, one woman that needed a garage that she could get a van in because she was now, you know, had to have a handicapped van and had to have space for equipment, medical equipment. Well, you'd say that was the hardship. She had a hardship. Now, she's not going to live there forever. The house is going to be modified and somebody else is going to have it. And somebody else could come in with a story that sounds equally as you know, commanding, but may not have any substance behind it too. So we're at the mercy of that. But I think it'd be better for them to come in at least prepared with a good description of the hardship that they think is going to occur if we deny it.
And we're working on some interior, internal procedural process and issues where right now we don't require petitioners to have a pre-filing meeting. And so they submit what they submit, often without any consultation with us. But we're working on, you know, requiring, probably maybe through an adjustment through the rules of procedure, where it would require a pre-filing, and then we can talk about the findings that they have to prove.
So the changes to our rules will be ready next month, did I see that on the agenda
Draft.
for next month?
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yep.
we'll be able to, okay.
Right, was it next month, or was it the following month? I think
Oh, yeah,
we should-
well,
I thought I saw it in September.
as we found
Might
out
be.
this morning during our staff meeting,
Yes.
Jody needs staff, not just the plan commission, but staff to contribute some stuff. I think we're going to get that done pretty quick.
For
but as
plan
long-
commission,
Yeah, as long as we do that, she'll be ready for plan commission
next month.
next month.
But I think you need another month afterwards to,
Well, once, I think the changes are going to be, I think the two documents are close enough to where once we make the staff determinations about the plan commission things, I can duplicate those to the BZA documents. So I don't think we'll need another month. I think we're ready to go.
the draft in August?
I
or
think the
September, that is.
draft will be ready in September.
Yeah.
But just to piggyback off your comment, I don't think it helps the conversation really at all, but oftentimes the facts that you see are the revisions, because the first one turned in was not the greatest. And so we do work the,
We had a great one the night of the meeting, but the one we got in our packet was,
You're like, oh boy.
you know, a sixth grader could have written it.
staff behind the scenes dances this dance, you know, for 3 or 4 weeks with various people. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But at the end of the day, we come forward with the last, you know, there's been days where I mean, you know, tonight's a great example. I got some of the stuff at 5:01 in my email. And so, you know, there's times where,
You have our undying gratitude.
and,
You're gonna
well, I
need a
mean,
whole nother
and
Jonathan if you're
the
gonna have a
point
conference
is,
with
you
everybody.
want them to improve on their findings, and the things that you see oftentimes are the improved versions.
So just to be,
Wow.
Believe you.
You have a best of list, don't you, somewhere?
Yes, we do, yeah, we do.
just to tie this all up, I understand that we are supposed to give input to the staff regarding the staff reports, whether there are things that are there that we don't think should be there, or things that are there that we think shouldn't be there, or are they perfect in every way?
Are the staff reports helpful? And can they, you know, is there too much or too little? Is there something you'd like to see more of or less of in the staff reports? And we just wanted to kind of get a little bit of feedback from you. And maybe do this, you know, every so often. It's just, you know, what are your thoughts about the staff reports? Can we improve upon them? You know, that type of thing. You know, are they lacking in any way, or, you know, are we providing too much information? Like one of our staff persons said that, you know, she spent 2 days doing research on the history of a petition. It's like, is that information that's worth 2 days of staff time to go through 20 years or more of background on a lot? And, you know, it's kind of a rhetorical question, because I don't expect you to answer that right now, but we just want to get some feedback. You know, are you seeing what you want? Sometimes you feel that it was differently written or formatted?
I'm fine with the format.
Okay.
Two things that I thought of, one would be when, you know, staff, and you probably are gonna get, if you're not already there, you'll probably see things where you've recommended denial or haven't met criteria, but that we're likely to approve it. If there are elements then that we should build into that, and sometimes we get those, but a lot of times there's probably not, but include that in there. You know, if the BZA decides to approve this, you know, staff recommends something.
Okay.
And you're talking about conditions or
Or
other.
conditions.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Right.
conditions,
So-
the recommended language on the conditions
So
and so
staff
forth.
staff may not support the proposal, but if the BZA is inclined to grant the proposal, we recommend these conditions.
Right,
Yeah,
that it should be
exactly.
granted with these particular
Yeah.
conditions. Yeah.
That would
Okay.
help.
And I think you do that. I think that you've done that on several occasions.
We've done it on a few
Right.
conditional approvals, but, you know, we can replicate that, I guess, on, you know, because we provide sample motions on every staff,
Right.
staff report, even if we do recommend denial. So we can provide a sample motion, you know, similar to what he said, add that to the report. That's not a problem.
And I'm sure it won't be every case, but occasionally there will be something that might soften that a bit, or at least kind of keep it closer to what staff might be recommending.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and we used to get this, and I don't know that it's good or bad, but that is the incidence of typical approvals that have been granted for a similar request. You know, I want to increase my lot percentage coverage by X percent. There may be 5 houses on the same block that have already done that. And again, I don't know if it's necessary if we're only focused on the criteria that it takes to approve, but it is comforting to know, okay, just about every one of their neighbors has already done this, you know, whether it's a patio or an expansion or whatever. And then, because when it gets down to there are no neighbors that have done this before, setting precedent gets a lot more prioritized, I think, at least from my standpoint. This is going to be the first, and I'm questionable about whether or not they met all the criteria. I'd probably say no. But if it's, you know, one house in a neighborhood that's got most of their neighbors are enjoying this same variance, then I'd like to know that, so that we're not excluding the one person that might not have asked yet for it.
See, and that's a situation which I think one of the petitions we had tonight would have been useful, because they had gotten HOA approval for what they wanted to do, and we ended up continuing it. But it might have been interesting to have that, whether that's happened a lot with the properties in that area.
Yeah.
Would have been interesting.
I do tend
Also-
to look up context maps on myself constantly, because they are very zoomed in, they need to be, but when you zoom out, you see yourself that, no, none of those other houses have been added on.
I sometimes look at
None
that.
of them, right, in that whole,
Okay.
as far as the eye can see,
Yeah.
sort of, and you're like, well, it's just you then,
Yes.
right? Everybody else is happy with their 5,200
Yeah,
square feet.
so like a context map, I
A
like
little
that a
bit
lot.
more
Yeah.
context
Oh, okay.
to see, especially in denser areas, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
Steve's point, where you're impacting your neighbors more.
I agree with a map would be great, but I also think some of that is the petitioner's responsibility to come up and say, hey, my 3 neighbors to the left have done this already, the 2 on the right have done this already. Procedurally, you guys come on, just, you know, that's,
How much research
it's part of
is
their
it?
job to kind of tell
Yeah.
us that their story, and that's part of their story.
Yeah.
But I agree, from a staff standpoint of providing us a little bit of a greater parameters of what's around the area a little bit would help.
Yeah,
Well,
that might be a lot of research for you to look up every
Yeah.
variance everybody in the
Okay.
neighborhood's had.
And
Okay.
that sort of belies the idea that every case is not a precedent. Every case is a petition is an individual petition. So we need to be mindful that because the
You're
5
right.
neighbors have done it, that doesn't make it the right thing for this. You know, it should not be, it's context, but it's not decision-making.
Yeah, one of the things I tell people, at least I don't know if we told them before I started on the team, but anytime I take somebody's money, before I take it and process it, because inevitably if I process that check, they're going to want a refund. And then that's a huge process through town council, right? So I tell people, day one, first time I ever see them, before I take their application, you could go through this entire process, you could pay all the money, all of your neighbors could have the exact same thing that you're asking for, and you could still walk away with a denial. And if you're not okay with that, don't give me your money. So that's a statement everybody hears before they ever start this process for me, because one of my earliest ones here, that's how I found out about a refund, was they wanted a refund after the fact, and it was just, it was not pleasant. It wasn't like I could just go and just cancel that out of the system and just give it back to them.
Yeah.
And so they hear that statement every time. So it's not like I
So,
can't say
One
that
other
anymore.
question,
Sure.
just because it'll circularly get us back around here. You recently redefined the attached garages as primary structure, not
Yes.
accessory. Have you seen an impact from that? Because we haven't seen anybody asking for extras since you've changed that.
Jonathan?
Oh yeah, huge
Okay.
impact. Yeah.
We don't have to see them nearly as much anymore.
Oh yeah, you'll see. I don't know if you will see another one, honestly, just because it wasn't just taking away attached garages from the accessory equation. It's adding it to the primary square footage. So it's, almost a ×2 flip in the number. And then we took it a step farther, not just garages, but covered, used to, we'd look at sunrooms and covered patios and you know, those types of things. Now, if it's under the main roof of the house, it's primary, right? And so it's not
It was
just attached
expected.
garages.
That's better.
So we have kind of loosened up the
Yeah,
rules
we
a little
have.
bit.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it does make a
Was
difference.
there
Yes.
anything else on your radar you're looking at
Or
redefining to
with
make?
staff, or what also, along with staff reports, is
Yeah.
staff presentations, you know,
Okay.
how we're doing things. And we did switch it up a little bit, you know, where
Mm-hmm.
staff presents first, and then the petitioner presents secondly, that we were doing it the inverse for a while
No, I think
there.
that's better.
Better
No,
now?
I think it's better.
I do like that quite a bit better, both on at this level and on the PC level as well. It just, it flows better.
Okay.
It flows a lot better. You got the staff reports and presentations have always, you guys make us look a lot smarter, better at this than we really are. I mean, or at least I don't want to speak for you guys, but
Well, I will
you guys
say.
do a great job. I'm very, very impressed with what you present to us
Well,
and
thank
what
you.
you provide for us on a monthly basis. So.
Yeah, just to put a cap on the kind of changes, if y'all see something that's coming through and you're, like this primary, accessory over primary, and you see this, a constant reoccurring thing, let us know. If you feel like we need to take a look at it, we can. Obviously, those types of changes have to go through Plan Commission and then Town Council. But, let us know if you have something you want us to look at specifically. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everybody. So.
Is that a good note to end on?
I think that's great.
Thank you, everyone.
Meeting adjourned.
Good job.
Only one person made it through the whole meeting.
Hey, two, right.